right, Alexander, we're live. You drinking coffee or tea?
I drink tea, obviously. What else? Nice cold British day. So you've got to drink British tea, Yorkshire tea, I should say.
All right. I don't see anyone in the live chat. Is someone out there? Is anyone out there? We kind of did this live stream spur of the moment, but we wanted to go live.
Pretty much, but I mean, there's lots going on with Biden in the Middle East. So we had Alex and I had a discussion, and we decided that this is a topic we need to talk about, and it's a big topic. So we thought we'd do a live about it, and it's Friday, and it seems a good day to do that too. So we could cover a lot of ground, I think.
Yeah, I don't see anyone in the chat. I don't see any messages coming through at all.
That is strange.
Which is very odd.
Is it something?
Refresh.
Yeah. Let's see. Maybe it's our friends.
The YouTube.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not saying.
Let me see here. Yeah. Live chat. Enable live chat. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I've got everything. All right.
Okay.
Interesting.
Well, we'll see what happens over the course of this.
Yeah, I don't see anyone on the chat at all.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Let me do a test post.
I know. I'm seeing something. It's coming up here. Yeah. Top chat replay. Now, good morning from Northern Alberta.
Okay, I don't see anything coming through.
No, it's coming through to me. I can see there's people from Chaz, the Chaz in Seattle. Good morning from the Chaz in Seattle. Wow. Oh, no. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. That's
okay, here it is. Now it's coming in.
Now it's coming in, yeah.
Now it's finally coming in.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, it works now. Great. Now I see everybody. How's everyone doing? All right. Sorry about that, guys, but we weren't getting any any activity in the live stream. So all right. Cool. How's everyone doing today, this Friday? And that just came up. Yes, the live stream just came up. Okay. Hope everyone is doing well. February's almost done. Month is almost gone. God, I hope lockdowns end.
It's been a long, hard winter, actually. Cold in the north and cold in the United States too. It seems people in Texas having a very, very hard time. Cold and dark and lockdown.
All right. Okay. Now it's coming in. All right. Spartan Warrior Queen is with us as well. She's got the wrench today. As always, Spartan Warrior Queen, good to have you here. Hope you are doing well. And let's see where people are joining us from. Let's see, from Haiti, Maine. Where else? Florida. Oh, man, Florida. What a great state that is. Perth, Australia. Wisconsin. Valies. How are you doing, Valies? Warm in California. Okay, Massachusetts, USA. How are you doing, Cheryl? Good to have you here. Upstate New York. Let's see, Aussie. All right, Tel Aviv. How's everyone doing in Tel Aviv? From Canada, Pakistan, Glasgow, Scotland, Tennessee. Awesome. New Jersey, Cabo, Mexico. Am I drinking Cabo, Mexico. I've got a Mexico mug here. How's everyone doing in Mexico? One of my favorite places in the whole world. I love Mexico. Used to live there. Northern Ireland, from Chile, Cyprus. Yeah, today is a cold day, Richard, in Cyprus. It is a cold day. Sunny but cold. Wales, France, Ohio, Michigan, Portland, Montreal. All right, Moon Swan Silverlight, how are you? How are you doing? Portland, Oregon. Hello, Megan. Derby. Okay, we got people in here, Alexander. Maybe we'll do, guys, maybe I'll put definitely towards, as the show gets rolling, I'll put a link for the live stream so that people can actually jump on with us. And when I put that link, I'll say this all again, but when I put that link, and Valies, you'll also see the link as well, so we could just put it on there a couple of times. We'll just test it out, guys. And you could just jump in and ask us a question via the live stream. just make sure that you're using a Chrome browser. This is really important. Make sure you're using a Chrome browser. Make sure you have your video camera off. And also make sure you're using headphones so we don't get feedback. But I'll post that link in as the show gets moving. And let's give it a test. Let's see how a type of call-in show works. Let's see if we can give it a go. Of course, we're all concerned about the trolls, but hopefully we'll be all right. Hopefully we'll get some good conversation going, and we'll be able to actually talk to everybody. And you'll be able to talk to us. That'll be nice.
That would be great. That would be fantastic, actually.
All right. So we'll do that as the show gets revving up. Alexander, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I mean, it's been interesting times in Britain always, and we're seeing a political crisis in Scotland, which is so interesting, and all kinds of things here. But personally, for myself, we're doing very well, my wife and I, and we actually enjoy the weather. I rather like it cold sometimes in London when it's sunny, and my two dogs absolutely adore it. So this is the kind of thing they absolutely love. They love running around when it's cold, when it's muddy. They like to slosh around in the mud, and then we have to spend hours of time cleaning the house. But there we are.
All right. Great. Texas, people in Texas, hope you guys are doing well in Texas. Big news with the weather in Texas. Amazing stuff going on there. Just absolutely amazing. Let's see. What do you think of the Australia taking on the big tech? Yeah, we did some videos on big tech. Actually, we've done a lot of videos on Australia and big tech. Canada is also now revving up to take on big tech, as we predicted, Alexander. With Australia, now more countries are going to say, we want a piece of that Google, Facebook revenue. Why not? It's logical. It's easy money. Easy money.
Absolutely. Easy money. And of course, they open the door for people to do that to them. I mean, I have to say this, whatever else these guys are, they are not particularly savvy about the consequences of their own actions. I mean, if they sought advice, anybody with any understanding of politics, of the way people feel, of economics, would have told them, don't do this. Don't do this thing. You're going to put your own business model at huge risk. And they went ahead and did it anyway, which goes to show how out of touch ultimately they really are.
Yeah. All right. White Light. Yes, Levendis. How you doing, White Light? Good to have you here. Yeah, Texas, they're focusing on Cruz. That was unforced error. Unforced error on Cruz's part. But you know what's interesting about that? If it was the Democrats, they would have circled the wagon. You know, Democrats are really good at circling the wagon and make sure that they insulate and protect each other.
Oh, well, absolutely.
With Ted Cruz, the conservatives are hitting at Ted Cruz. So, I mean, I'm like, why are you guys going after him? You guys should learn from the Democrats. Circle the wagon, at least. It was an unforced error, but
absolutely.
You know, don't hit out at him.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I have to say, I mean, it didn't look good, and he deserves to be criticized. But compare that with the things that Cuomo has been up to in New York, and I mean, there you see the contrast. It seems to me, and in the case of Cuomo, certainly before the election, the Democrats did circle the wagon around him.
Oh, they gave him an Emmy. An Emmy. So all right. So. Let's get to our main topic, Alexander, and thank you everybody for joining us today as well. We really appreciate it, and thank you to everyone that watches our videos, that likes our videos, like this video as well. And you can also find us, my channel, Alexander's channel, of course, the Duran. We're on all the Alt Tech, BitChute, and Rumble and Odyssey, so look for us there. Alexander, we've been saying for a while that the Biden administration would have no choice but to go to war. I mean, you know, there would be no choice in the matter because the war machine is itching for conflict in most likely the Middle East, and I think we're right about that. That if there's going to be any conflict going on, it'll be in the Middle East, and that's the way things are shaping up. We're starting to hear the whispers of an IS resurgence. I mean, we are starting to hear the whispers. ISIS is back. IS is forming again. So we're starting to hear the early chatter of that. We're hearing the Taliban in Afghanistan is ramping up. We're starting to hear chatter about that. And today we actually got the first troop surges from NATO. We got 3,500 troops going back to Iraq from NATO. I'm sure the U.S. is going to follow. Actually, I think the Pentagon has already made statements saying, you know, that's a good idea. Maybe we should ramp up our troops as well. So you're actually now starting to get troop movement.
Yes.
And it looks like that we are in the very beginnings of what will eventually be, in my opinion, I think what will eventually be some sort of false flag. Something's going to happen. And then we're going to start to hear the usual Assad must go type of rhetoric. I'm not saying it's going to be Syria. I think it'll be Syria, but maybe it'll be somewhere else. But we're going to start hearing that rhetoric. We also have a lot of activity in the JCPOA where we're hearing that the negotiations may be back on. But once again, the Biden White House doesn't really want a resolution there either. And you mentioned before we went live, and I'm going to paraphrase what you said. You said, of course, they wouldn't want a resolution because they need to keep the tension moving. So, I mean, overall, I think the picture is we're starting to hear the whispers of war coming, of ISIS reforming, and then we're starting to see that the Biden White House really doesn't want to calm things down. Actually, they want to keep things very tense, probably because we're heading towards some sort of conflict.
I think that's exactly right. Now, let's just unpack this and take this step by step. So firstly, we see troop movements into eastern Syria. And these troop movements into eastern Syria are coinciding with a significant revival of ISIS in eastern Syria. We see that there's been hit and run attacks in eastern Syria, in central Syria too. Most of them, in fact, overwhelmingly, they have been focused upon the Syrian military, by the way. And that's unsurprising because if you don't have a government in control of a large part of its territory, if that part of its territory is contested territory, this area, particularly if it's in the Middle East, inevitably and unavoidably becomes badlands, and you start to see all sorts of bad people starting to converge on those badlands and cohere there. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing ISIS getting stronger in eastern Syria, in the badlands of eastern Syria, which are outside the control of the Syrian government, but where the US has also been reinforcing its position and where the Turks are also present in certain places. We also see a ramping up, apparently, of other terrorist movements in Idlib province and attempts there to try and come to some sort of arrangements. And of course, Turkey is also a presence there. So we see gathering problems in Syria. And by the way, the Russians are responding to those by reinforcing their troops in Syria and by opening new bases further east in Syria. So we also see various military moves and counter moves being taken. But just to quickly add, I agree with Alex. I think Syria will be the focus because for the neocons in Washington, Syria is their unfinished business. We also see problems in Lebanon. And remember, what happens in Lebanon and what happens in Syria closely connected to each other. There's even some talk now of Lebanon breaking up and of there being partition in Lebanon. We see troop movements into Iraq again. So an attempt to reinforce US positions in Iraq. We see talk of a major US arms supplies to Egypt, country with which the Biden administration had given the impression that it was going to be on bad terms, but ultimately it seems that Egypt is too important for whatever game is going to be played to be dispensed with. So we see talk about arms sales to Egypt. We have also heard lots about how Biden and MBS apparently don't get on, and it's the case that Biden hasn't yet spoken to MBS, but in fact and in reality, and I've been seeing this in several places now, it seems that the Biden administration and the Saudis are actually in quite deep discussion. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has spoken with the Saudi foreign minister, and they seem to be moving back towards basically alliance which will be based on opposition to Iran. At least that's always what they say. We should be careful about assuming that what these people say is necessarily what they are thinking. And last but not least, we see this stop-go behavior with Iran. on the one hand, the Biden administration has been dropping hints that they'd be going back into the JCPOA. They haven't actually done so. They're now setting conditions to do so, which is that Iran modify its regional policies. And they've also said at various times, they've given contradictory signals about sanctions. Talking about Iran modifying its regional policy means essentially Iran pulling out of Iraq and Syria, which of course Iran is not going to do. But that again tells us that Iraq and Syria are perhaps the places where we should see whatever military action is being intended happening. So all sorts of things going on at various levels. And of course, I forgot to mention Afghanistan, where the whole idea of the Trump White House of withdrawing from Afghanistan has been reversed. In fact, we now see moves to reinforce the US presence there, and we see the fighting in Afghanistan intensifying again. So where we went from a position under Donald Trump where the Middle East was actually becoming more peaceful, a fact, by the way, that people tended to ignore. ISIS was defeated, the caliphate was destroyed, the Syrian army regained control of most of its territory. Jihadi movements were bottled up in places like Idlib. There was a pullback or an attempted pullback from Syria, which of course, as we know, was sabotaged. There was an attempted pullout from Afghanistan, which as we know was also sabotaged. But things seemed generally to be calming down. They're now heating up again.
What do you make of the fact that, and I believe someone in the live stream also reminded me, it's a good point, that Haram al-Sham?
Yeah.
Or a group is being rebranded in Syria as moderate again.
That's right.
This is a very worrying sign, isn't it?
Of course.
I mean, this means that, once again, they're preparing the media narrative, aren't they?
Yes.
They've even selected a person who before was on the terrorist list, but all of a sudden now he's being rehabilitated and he's making TV appearances. I actually think he was on the BBC, if I'm not mistaken. And they're already rehabilitating this group. And this is going to be the new moderate, quote unquote, the moderate rebels, right? I mean, the narratives are being prepared in the media. And we are literally, I would say, maybe 3 months away from some sort of false flag. I don't know. That's my gut speaking. But what do you make of this rehabilitation?
I absolutely see. I mean, what we see when we see these groups that are in Syria, which, to be very clear, are absolutely consistent. Their ideology never changes. Their militant motivation never changes. They go through endless rebrandings in order to make it look as if, they're not really affiliated with Al-Qaeda, when, of course, in practice, we all know that they are actually. But there's always these attempts to repackage them so as to make them somehow more palatable to American and European and world opinion. And of course, in reality, they are who they always were. And during the time of the Obama administration, there was always this attempt to try and find the moderate rebels who would be, you could rely upon them to pursue moderate policies, when they seized power. Nobody really believed that. It was always ultimately about defeating and overthrowing the Syrian government and moving on from there and not worrying too much about what happens or who it is who actually does this thing. And we see exactly the same now. So now we have this group that's again being repackaged as a moderate group, when it is, of course, nothing of the kind. And journalists and reporters who know the area, like Patrick Coburn, have repeatedly said there are no real moderate rebels of any significance in Syria. And when the Obama administration and the Pentagon tried to find some, it never could. And that, by the way, was one of the reasons why Michael Flynn broke with Obama and the White House and went over and supported Donald Trump. Because of the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, he knew that these so-called moderate rebels simply don't exist. So we see that this is an attempt again to revert to all these policies that were attempted before and which failed in every sense but one. and that is, of course, that they created more conflict, more war in the Middle East, which appears to suit some people in Washington.
Okay. The fact that NATO is ramping up as well, will Europe go along with this, or will Europe lead the way? I mean, as stuff gets ramped up in the Middle East, as the war machine starts revving up its engines, NATO is going to obviously be part of this. That would mean Europe is part of this. Are we going to be seeing a replay of the Obama years, i.e., refugee crisis, everything just playing out over again? Because we've said it many times, these guys just don't learn. The Merkels, the Macrons, the Bidens, the Obamas, the Stoltenbergs, they just don't learn.
No, they don't learn and they don't change. And this is, of course, one of the depressing and worrying things, is that the anti-war movements that used to exist in the United States and in Europe have completely disappeared. One of the most pro-war parties in Germany, for example, one of the most interventionist parties, is now the Green Party, which, when it was originally set up in the 1970s and 1980s, as I very well remember, was first and foremost and above all else an anti-war party. It was even more of an anti-war party then than it was an ecological party. That has gone completely out of the window. They are now the most pro-interventionist party in Germany. And there is no anti-war movement in Germany of any significance anymore. And that is true right across Europe. And the same is happening in Britain, by the way. Britain, of course, being the country which, more likely than any other in Europe, apart from France, will commit troops to any adventure, any neocon adventure in the Middle East. Jeremy Corbyn was a powerful leader a powerful anti-war leader of the Labour Party. He always opposed consistently. So one thing about him which was completely consistent, he always opposed these interventionist wars in the Middle East. He's no longer the leader of the Labour Party, and the new leadership of the Labour Party has reverted again to the Blairite policies of supporting wars in the Middle East. In fact, I was reading just a few days ago a leaflet from a Labour Party think tank in which they were talking again about the need for humanitarian intervention and why this is the right thing and the good thing and all of those sort of things. So there is no anti-war movement in Europe. There's no anti-war movement of any significance anymore in the United States, except within the Republican Party, and to the extent that it is led by Donald Trump.
Exactly.
That's the important thing to understand. So,
that is the anti-war movement. That's exactly right. It is a Trump movement is the America First anti-war movement. Go on, Alexander. You're right.
And if there is going to be opposition to this, it is going to come from within the United States. That's what I wanted to say, and I think it will. By the way, I think more and more Americans are extremely disenchanted by all of this. Every survey of opinion in the United States shows that these sort of policies are deeply unpopular in the United States. They are not popular with the men and women who serve in the military, because they are there to defend the United States, not to go around and play geopolitical games in the Middle East. I mean, they're trained and disciplined and loyal troops, and they will carry out their orders. That doesn't mean that they're enthusiastic about these policies. And Donald Trump has the connection with these people, and the Republican Party, much of the Republican Party, is now swinging behind him. If there's going to be opposition to all of this, it is going to come there. And all of these things that you're seeing in the United States at the moment, the attempt to throw people off social media, the demonization, the smears, all of that, that's partly intended, I think, to silence these voices before the war comes. Of course, what will actually happen is that when the war comes, it will galvanize opinion in the United States, because that's what invariably happens, though it may take time to do so.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention the fact that some more troubling signs, and that's the fact that Blair is back Tony Blair is all over the news. He's been rehabilitated, and I think it's just a small hop from what he's talking about with regards to the shot and lockdowns and stuff like that, to get him to start talking about ramping up war in the Middle East. So you have Blair rehabilitated. You have people like Nikki Haley, who's now back in the news, and she's an obvious warmonger. Samantha Power. I mean, you're starting to see all these faces start to pop up again. I think that's not a coincidence.
Absolutely correct. And can I just say, with Tony Blair, one of his closest aides, one of the people who's most unpopular and disliked in genuine left-wing circles in Britain, Peter Mandelson, has just been reappointed to a senior position within the Labour Party leadership, and that is a clear indicator of Blair's growing influence within the Labour leadership again. It's a fascinating thing, by the way. Labour Party is becoming ever less popular as it commits ever more strongly to globalization, globalist and interventionist foreign policies. And yet that seems to be its default position. So you see the Starmer-led Labour Party that we now see, it's slipping in the opinion polls. It's falling ever further behind the Conservatives. But its priority is clearly to pursue these sort of policies in the Middle East and elsewhere. And the re-emergence of Blair and the appointment of Mandelson is a very, very bad sign.
All right, a couple more questions that I'll throw at you, Alexander, and then we'll do some super chats and we'll open up the lines and see how it goes. The U.S. usually likes to, the war machine likes to work in a multi-pronged type of information war facet, and while they're preparing the real war, they like to engage in a lot of distractions. And you can name some of those distractions. I think people that are viewing this live stream know what those distractions are. On the flip side, they also like to engage with other countries that they think might impede their march towards regime change, call it revolution or conflict, by throwing certain impediments their way. And my question to you is, Navalny, Russia, protests, he's been rehabilitated in a way as well. Do you think that is also a way for the war machine to put pressure on Russia? In other words, you have distractions in the US, like the impeachment stuff, but they're also working to create distractions and obstacles for Russia, while at the same time, bringing up the demonization of Russia again, trying to, bring that up to the surface in anticipation of the fact that if there's going to be one country that will stand in their way from regime change in Syria, it's obviously going to be Russia.
Absolutely. Can I just say, this has been very much the pattern of the last few weeks. And it's fascinating to see how the Russians have responded, because actually they've pushed back incredibly hard, far harder than the Europeans and perhaps even the Americans expected. There's going to be the Munich Security Conference in a few days, and the talk is that Biden is going to make a very hardline speech criticizing Russian policies and claiming that the Russians are trying to undermine Western democracy and interfering in Western affairs. Well, we've heard all that story again, but of course, all that's happening as we see this concerted effort to interfere in Russian domestic policies. Except this time, and this is a change. A couple of years ago, the Russians always used to try and engage people, West, and say, "Well, look, we understand, you're unhappy about Navalny and all that, but let's try and work something out." They're not saying that anymore. They are taking an exceptionally hard line. And they've just said again today, if the European Union wants to sever relations with them, they will take it. If it wants to stop Nord Stream 2, they will accept that too. They will take whatever the Europeans and the Americans throw at them, but they will not change their policies and they will not change their line. And the reason they're taking these very hard positions is, firstly, I think they realize the purposes of all of this pressure. But also, I think the Russians feel that, they've been pursuing a fortress Russia policy now for some years. They've been building up their industries. They've pursued import substitution programs. They've developed food security. I mean, they're now self-sufficient in food. They've always been self-sufficient in energy. They've got their own microprocessor industry so that they're making their own chips, for example, which they didn't previously. That's, by the way, a big change and a little reported thing. But the Russian military industries now use Russian chips rather than imported chips from Taiwan and the US. They've done all of these things. And so they feel, which they didn't feel before, that they can afford to take this very hard line. In fact, their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has said as much. And I think the West was taken by surprise by the toughness of the Russian reaction to the Navalny affair. And you can see that in some of the commentaries, both in Russia and in the West as well. I think people had not expected in the West that the Russians would take this utterly uncompromising line over Navalny. And what we saw was an attempt was made to organize protests in Russia, and it failed. It's been called off. There was an angry meeting, apparently, between NATO officials and people from Navalny's organization, in which the Navalny's people were told to restart the protests, which they sort of did, but in a very ineffectual way with torches and all that, which is, all but invisible. There was a very disappointed and frustrated article about this in the Financial Times, admitting the fact that these protests had failed. And in fact, and this is a point which the Russian journalist made, Russian journalist Vladimir Solovyov made to Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in that famous interview we've all heard so much about. This kind of pressure has had the effect, apparently, of consolidating Russian society behind the government, which is what these sort of events invariably do. So the Russians have been preparing for this. They seem to be ready, and they're taking a very, very tough line. And we will see whether that's maintained. I predict it will be.
All right. Quick question. Going back to JCPOA, will Biden and the EU, will they move towards a resolution? Yes, or do you think they will? Yes or no? Or
no, I don't think they will, because I think, again, that they are miscalculating opinion in Iran. I think that what happened was, as we know, the Trump administration ramped up sanctions against Iran and put enormous pressure on Iran. But I think now it's fairly clear that Donald Trump, and I know people always say that I'm defending Donald Trump, but I think you need to read and listen to what Trump himself said. I think Donald Trump had ideas about what he wanted to achieve with Iran, which were actually just different from those of people like Bolton and Pompeo. I think what Donald Trump wanted was an overall resolution between the United States and Iran, a deal, if you like, which would be part of an overall establishment of some kind of peace in the Middle East. And I think that was actually, if it had been pursued consistently and with a diplomatic avenue going along in parallel with the sanctions avenue, it might have worked. I mean, I'm not saying it would have done, but it might have done. What Biden is trying to do is something quite different. He is using all these sanctions. He's putting all this pressure on Iran in order to leverage Iran into agreeing, firstly, the deal with the JCPOA, but in return, Iran will basically have to end its foreign policy in the Middle East, stop supporting Syrian government, stop involving itself to the extent it does in Iraq, in order to give the US, or at least the Biden administration, space to carry out its various ventures in the Middle East. So whereas Donald Trump was aiming ultimately at peace in the Middle East, Biden and people are aiming at, the remaking of the Middle East in their terms. So this is a completely different approach. And what the Biden people are discovering is that the Iranians are not prepared to play for this. they say the United States should simply re-enter the JCPOA and lift the sanctions. If they do that, Iran will scale back its own actions, which it's taken in relation to nuclear enrichment since the US left the JCPOA. And then, only then, will Iran be prepared to talk, but it will not compromise or concede on any of its basic positions. So I think the Biden people think that Iran's been pushed into a corner and it will, if you like, concede. And I think they are misreading Iranian opinion. I think Iran has managed in its usual chaotic way to sort out some of the problems, a lot of the problems in its economy. I think the economic situation in Iran is better than it was, say, a year ago. And I think also the Iranians sense that the larger geopolitical picture anyway is turning in their favor, because the way in which the Biden administration is conducting policy towards both Russia and China means that the Iranians feel that they have the Russians and the Chinese at their back in a way that they didn't before. So I don't think the Biden administration is going to get a deal with Iran, at least not of the kind of deal that they're looking for. And as I think that these people in the Biden administration want a deal only on their terms, I suspect we're not going to get a deal at all. So that's going to increase the tension and increase the problems in the Middle East, but it's already a sign, if you like, that whatever agenda is being followed in the Middle East by the Biden people and the neocons there, it already isn't working, because they don't understand that the leverage they think they have really isn't there.
All right, two more quick questions. Staying on Trump, domestic war against Trump's base, i.e. domestic terrorism, domestic war against Trump's base, censorship, all that stuff, in order to distract or to keep at bay, let's use that word, in order to keep at bay the protests for what is eventually coming, which is an international conflict. True or not true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've no doubt about this. I mean, look at the language that's being used. Look at the language that John Brennan used about talking about the fact that the United States, that these people who are basically, as we said, the anti-war people. I mean, the patriotic anti-war movement in the United States, the people who love the United States and support the United States, but who leave the policy, that America should look after its own problems and look after its own people. That kind of anti-war movement, which is different from some of the anti-war movements we've had in the United States in the past. But John Brennan says that they are the potentially greater danger to the United States than the jihadi movements of the Middle East are. I mean, he actually has gone on television and he's talked about these tens of millions of Americans in exactly that sort of way. Now, I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want to make things even more apocalyptic than they really are. But that is the language that people like Brennan is using. And when you talk like that about those sort of people, you have to ask yourself, well, what are your intentions towards those sort of people? Well, clearly you want to bring the entire apparatus of the United States government down on them, because you are afraid that when you pursue all these foreign policy adventures in places like the Middle East, they will protest against you. And that's what the whole agenda is all about stopping them and preventing them from protesting as they might otherwise be inclined to do. I don't think it's going to work, by the way. I think, on the contrary, it will intensify, galvanize opinion in the United States. It will, in the end, strengthen anti-war feeling in the United States as more people in the United States start to make the connections and start to see what exactly is going on and realize that, the people in Washington have agendas which are completely different from the agendas American people might want to see followed, and are prepared to use all kinds of methods, both at home and abroad, in order to see those agendas through. And I think we're going to see more opposition in the United States and more powerful political opposition than we would otherwise. But if you are pursuing a dangerous and reckless foreign policy, which involves wars and fighting, and you are not confident of the support of your own people, then of course it's unsurprising that you should resort to these kind of methods.
All right. And finally, Alexander, Turkey, the wild card.
Yes,
Turkey is the wild card. What will Turkey do? Will they stay with Russia? Will they align with the US? And of course, we're always talking about Syria, because that's where we think the action is going to take place. That's where the conflict will most likely take place. We could be wrong, but definitely Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. What will Turkey do? I think Turkey is that's the big question mark for me.
There's a huge question mark, and of course, always with Erdogan, it's never easy to see, because of course Erdogan has his own ambitions and his own concerns, and he's also a canny politician who has all kinds of ways of changing position from one day to the next. Some days he seems to be on the side of the Russians. Other times he's working with the Americans. He's never easy to work out. But look, I think when Biden was elected, Erdogan made, in his own mind, a serious effort to reconcile with the US. After all, he does have some things in common with the neocons. For different reasons, he too wants to see the Assad government in Syria overthrown. He's also got major interests in Iraq. He wants to carve out Turkey as a major regional power in the Middle East. So I think he was looking to try to cut some kind of a deal with the Americans, and with the Biden administration at least. And of course, what he said was, in relation to the S-400s, which Turkey has bought from Russia, and which was such a sticking point, he was sort of dropping hints through his officials. Well, look, this is such a big problem. What we will do is we will transfer these missiles to Azerbaijan, or put them in store. We can't simply scrap our agreement to buy them with the Russians, but that's what we'll do. But in return, we want from the US some deals on things that concern us. And one of those things is we want to see the US drop support for the Kurds in Syria. No more support for the Kurds, no more support for the YPG, which is the major Kurdish movement in Syria. We want to see the US basically end its alliance with the Kurds, because the YPG, the Kurdish movement, is also a problem for us in Turkey. And we see this as an existential issue for Turkey, because they are an enemy to the unity of Turkey. And they were making these offers. And what apparently has happened is that the Biden administration has said, no, we're not prepared to do that. We are going to continue to back the YPG and the Kurds in Syria exactly as we did previously. And we're not interested in your concerns about this, but we still want you to support us in everything else we're doing. And we also want you to stop buying arms from Russia. The S-400 sales must end. And if you don't do that, we're going to sanction you. So this is again where the neocons find it very difficult to bend to realities. They try to push Turkey and to force Turkey to cooperate on their terms. They in their own calculations, they need the Kurds. They need to work with the Kurds in order to destabilize the Syrian government. So they're not prepared to drop the Kurds, and they are ending up drifting back into a confrontation with Turkey, which actually has been trying to mend fences with them. It's exactly the same mistake that Obama made. Erdogan and Trump actually, at a personal level, got on well with each other. Erdogan and Obama ended up detesting each other because Erdogan found that he just couldn't work with Obama at all. He couldn't speak to Obama, and Obama never showed any interest either in Erdogan's problems or in Turkey's problems. And it seems to me that we're starting to see the first signs that we're back to that situation again. We talk about Obama 3, but that's exactly what it is with Turkey, with Syria, with all sorts of places. I saw an article in a magazine somewhere, I can't remember which one, in which he said it's like going back to 2014, 2015 all over again, when, you know, the United States first started to interfere in Syria, first started to get involved in Iraq, you know, because of ISIS was there under the Obama administration, supporting moderate terrorists, doing all these kind of so-called moderate terrorists, doing all sorts of things like this, ending up quarreling with Turkey, ending up trying to cut deals with Iran, which in the end, as we know, unraveled. It's as if they're trying to go back to the policies that the Obama administration followed, that Obama followed, and which failed. I mean, that's the paradox of it. You know, what was it that was said? You know, do the same thing again and again and again, however often it fails, and it's a sign of, you know, insanity. Well, that there isn't very much sanity in this, or so it seems to me.
Yeah. That's why all of this is so predictable.
It's
just a third term Obama, and it's so predictable. You know?
Yes, it's a bad copy of this, because at least Obama, I mean, whatever else he was, I mean, was a clever man. I give him that, and somebody who knew what he was doing. I do wonder to what extent Sleepy Joe knows what's going on around him. But that's another story. I mean, that's
the main difference. I think the main difference is that you know, under Obama, Obama was very hesitant to confront Russia.
Yes.
In Syria.
Yes.
He was very hesitant to do that, even though he was getting pushed to do it. So he did back off there. And in the UK, there was a movement to not engage with Syria. I mean, you know, the people in the UK spoke very clearly that they don't want the government involved in a Syria conflict as well. Today, I don't know. You know, I mean, Biden is obviously not all there to say, you know, let's not ramp up a war in Syria because it could lead to a wider conflict. You have a Turkey that's engaged not only in its immediate region in Syria and in Iraq, but I mean, you have a Turkey engaged in Greece and Cyprus, previously engaged in with Armenia. I mean, and then you have in the UK. I don't know if the sentiment in the UK is the same, where they will actually press the Johnson government and say, look, Boris, don't you dare go into Syria. I just don't know. I mean, it seems like we're in a much more delicate position today than we were, you know, in Obama's second term.
We are in a much more delicate position. Firstly, you're absolutely right. The restraints that existed before, the internal restraints within governments, are no longer there. I mean, Obama was a kind of erratically restraining force. I mean, there were moments when he would say, you know, we're not going to go there, because if we're going to start attacking Syria, we're going to get ourselves into all sorts of problems. And the same is true in Britain. As I said, the Labour Party is now completely won over. At least the parliamentary Labour Party, it's important to stress this, is completely won over to the pro-war side. So there is that. However, I also have to say that I get the sense that the politics in the Middle East and the greater geostrategic politics are actually less favorable for these sort of adventures than they were in 2014 and wherever, in the sense that I think Russia is stronger in terms of opposing these things than it was then. And of course, it now has a big military footprint in Syria and in the rest of the Middle East. I think Iran is also more determined to withstand these things. And of course, China now is more openly also committed to backing China, Russia, whatever. There's Iran, Russia, whatever. So I think that the geopolitics of this are more difficult than they were before. And I think also there is the factor that the Saudis and people of that kind are probably less trusting of the US and less willing to work with the US on these kind of adventures than they were perhaps then. So that those things do also matter. And we see also that Erdogan and Turkey are also less trusting. But if we come back to the United States and Britain, it's true that anti-war voices have been purged from the political class. But if you're talking about popular sentiments, I think it's a different thing. And one of the things that's been going on in Britain is that just as you have a battle within the Republican Party in the United States at the moment, there is also very clearly and very visibly a battle going on within the Labour Party. And I think the one way to really ignite that would be to start more wars in the Middle East, where I overwhelmingly think that popular feeling amongst Labour grassroots supporters would be opposed to those wars, just as they would be on the part of Republicans in the United States. It's very paradoxical and very bizarre in some ways that the Labour Party, which is a left-wing party, and the Republicans, who are a right-wing party, their grassroots on this one issue seem to think in very similar terms.
All right. Okay, let's get to some super chats. From Valias, a $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Valias, for that super chat. From Things That Make You Go, huh? Another resource war. Thank you, fellas.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you for
absolutely. And can I just say that's a brilliant point, because you see here we see again what Biden is doing. He's got to keep his ecological people on side, so he closes down the Keystone Pipeline. He's reducing fracking. He's encouraging all these green policies and electric cars and those things. Some of which no doubt very good things, but they will take time. In the meantime, he's actually reducing the US's energy independence. So what does he have to do to compensate? He has to produce, he has to find oil and gas and things like that from somewhere. Where does he go? Where do you look? You look at the Middle East. When I talk about Biden, of course, I don't mean Biden himself. I mean the administration around him. I don't know that Biden himself has really much deep strategic sense about most of what's going on.
Yeah, I doubt he does. From Hugger, a $10 super chat. Who can still believe in liberal democracy after a year like 2020? Maybe it's time for a different kind of reset, not a neoliberal globalist one. Love all your recent videos. Thank you very much.
Well, can I say, I think that's, again, a very profound point. I think the events of 2020 were a huge eye-opener for many, many people. I think they looked and they saw what happened, and they realized that the kind of neoliberal system that we have now is not actually a democracy in the sense that we used to understand that word. It's no longer become responsive to what people think or what they need or what they do. And of course, we had all those problems, which we have to be very careful what we say now. But I think we all know what we're talking, what I'm talking about, I'm referring to. So I think a lot of people are asking themselves, what must we do? Now, I am a convinced Democrat. I was brought up in a country which is not a democracy. I am absolutely someone who thinks the only way forward is through democracy. That's why I support pro-democratic movements in Europe, which means the opposite of the European Union and its bureaucracy, which are not elected and are not accountable. And I think in the United States, which, to be very clear, is the first real democracy. It was the first country that really started to organize itself as a democracy after the American Revolution, what we British still call the American War of Independence, by the way, but the American Revolution. I think people in the United States, who I still feel have a deep commitment to democracy, need to work to bring it back. And what we need to do is to build democracy, rebuild our democracies again, both in Europe, where they're much weaker, and in the United States, where they have very deep roots.
All right. From Patricia Klein, what are you guys most afraid of with the current administration?
Well, that they will blunder into something that they lose control of. And that is a real danger. I mean, I think it was Lloyd Austin, who is the new defense secretary, who actually said that there might even be that the dangers of an accidental nuclear war have grown. I don't believe that. Yeah, I mean, he was saying the Russians and the Chinese might start one. I don't believe that. I think the greater danger is that the United States could find itself into all kinds of problems in the Middle East. And I think that might lead to pressures to escalate, which could easily get out of control. And that would be a complete disaster. That would be a disaster on a scale that we've not seen before. And I hope it never comes to that. And I trust that it won't. Obama always acted in a way that prevented it from happening. But I'm afraid there are some people within the US government, Alex has named a few people, I'm not going to name them again, who it seems to me have no restraints, and I could easily see doing reckless and dangerous things.
Right. From Mark Hewitt, what would be the reaction if the US forces suffered a setback similar to the 1983 Beirut barrack bombings?
Well, there you go. You see, that's a classic example, because you had a president then, Ronald Reagan, who was absolutely in charge. I mean, a lot of comments about Reagan and all sorts of awful things were said about him in Europe. People forget this, by the way, and amongst his critics in the United States, which are very similar to the things they used to say about Donald Trump until a short time ago, or still say about Donald Trump. You know, that Reagan, didn't know what he was doing, that he was a fool, that he was incompetent. But actually, Reagan was fully in charge, knew his own mind, saw that the thing in Lebanon was getting out of control. And of course, he pulled the troops out of Lebanon. And he, in the end, took diplomatic steps which stabilized the situation in the Middle East and actually ended up increasing US influence there. So that's what happened in 83, which I very well remember, by the way. I don't think the people in Washington, D.C., faced by that kind of problem, will respond in that sort of way. I think, on the contrary, you will get all kinds of people confronted by the crisis like the one that happened in 83. They will demand instead escalation in that kind of situation. And with a weak president, a weak secretary of state, a vice president who is overambitious and inexperienced and frankly not up to the job, I think that it's very easy to see how those sort of people who demand escalation could actually get their way this time. And that would be a disaster, just as I said in my answer to the previous question.
All right. From Patricia Klein, £10 super chat. Precisely 1 month in office, Kamala calling world leaders and heating up in the Middle East. Why will the left never wake up to this disgusting hoodwinking?
Well, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought this up, because, of course, here we see Kamala Harris, who obviously has tilted very much to the left in the United States and talks in these left-wing ways. And she is, of course, along with people like Samantha Power and Susan Rice, are all back, that she's the great advocate of all these interventions and all of these wars. And she is acting as if she was the president. Alex and I did a program about this. She's calling up world leaders. She's talking to them about the whole range of US policies as if she was the president instead of Joe Biden. And there was all these points were made by Trump during the election that Kamala Harris is, the proof, the fact that she's the vice president proves that Biden is not the centrist that he made himself out to be. I think that's right, by the way. I mean, I'm not talking about Kamala Harris's background and her personal politics, but her current alignments show who she is with. And it is with people like Susan Rice, Samantha Power, and all those other people in the United States who've done all the various things and are doing all the various things that we've discussed in various programs. But unfortunately, and again, can I just apologize? People will realize we're having to use careful language all the time in order to be able to say what we can say. Anyway, who are doing all those things within the United States that are causing so much concern.
All right, from Patricia Drummond, $25 super chat. Do you think they're planning to take over the Brazilian Amazonia? Thank you.
Well, I would have thought not, actually. Interesting idea. I mean, the way they talk about what's going on in Brazil, I mean, again, I mean, you get a sort of sense that the apocalypse is happening there. And it's fascinating to see how, under when Lula was president, I mean, Brazil was this wonderful country and everybody was talking about what a wonderful place Brazil was. And Lula was the toast, when you came to Washington or New York, of all of these sorts of people. And when it's Bolsonaro, well, of course, it's all terrible, it's all awful, and it's all sorts of terrible things. And by the way, I should say, I mean, I don't know much about Bolsonaro, but what I do know about him, I'm not at all, I don't think of myself as his supporter or fan. But in relation to Amazonia, what I can say, and I know this, is that nothing very much has changed. It's exactly the same now as it was when Lula was president. And that's the truth. Nonetheless, it's suddenly become this huge topic of concern. I think this has more to do with meddling in Brazilian politics and trying to undermine the Bolsonaro government than it is with actually trying to seize control of Amazonia. But it would not be surprising at all if many Brazilians, knowing the past very well, think otherwise. It wouldn't surprise me. And who knows, perhaps there's some people in the United States who may say to themselves, well, the Brazilians aren't able to look after Amazonia, so maybe we should. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Sorry, I had it on mute. Sorry, I had it on mute. Sorry, my bad. From Sparky, until the last few decades, morality limited how far even corrupt American decision makers would go. But morality, which previously was a strong virtue in America, no longer exists in federal government.
You touch on a very, very interesting point, because of course, I don't know how far people know, but I did study, as part of my degree, American history, and I've always been very interested in American history ever since then. And you had long periods when, America, much of the political class was profoundly corrupt. I mean, corruption is not a new thing in America at all, but it was corrupt and it was deeply patriotic at the same time. What you have now is a political class which is actually, in my opinion, even more corrupt than the corruption that used to exist then. But this is the difference. They're not patriotic in the way that the old American political elites were. They are on the contrary, very much people who denigrate much of what the United States stands for. I mean, what is the 1619 Project, if not that in a way? And of course, if you are a globalist, if you think in those sort of terms, well, nation states and all that aren't really something you support anyway. It's something you're ultimately opposed to. So that is a fundamental and extraordinary difference, actually. You had the robber barons of the 1880s and 1890s, and they were pretty, tough and ruthless people. But they had a vision and a belief in America. A lot of the guys you see today are more corrupt than they were, and they don't have that vision, and they don't have that belief in America. On the contrary, they actually fundamentally, deep down, have big issues with America. They even despise it. And that's a huge change. That's never happened in America before.
All right, we'll take a couple more super chats, and then we'll get into some. We'll try out some calls from Hunger. When I am weaker than you, I ask you for freedom because that is according to your principles. When I am stronger than you, I take away your freedom because that is according to mine. That is a quote from the left, from Hunger.
Well, indeed. I mean, I've heard that, but of course, I mean, it's completely wrong, and it is completely an un-American activity, a principle, in my opinion.
All right, from Sparky, a $10 super chat. Our only hope may be to take advantage of the fact that most states are pro-Trump and call a constitutional convention implementing things such as term limits and other anti-corruption measures.
Well, I think, if I may say, I think the American people are the people who are going to have to solve these problems. I think they can, and I think that there are many things that can be done and could be done. But I would say, and I've said this before, that the most important thing for things to happen is there's lots of people in the United States now who are awakened to events and are very unhappy. What they need to do is to organize themselves democratically, and they can do it in all kinds of ways. I'm not an expert on American constitutional systems and, you know, setting up conventions and these kind of things. It's not for me to tell people what they should do and how they should do it, but absolutely they can win their republic back if they are prepared to work and achieve that. And, you know, when I say work, I don't mean, you know, working all the time. People can carry on with their jobs and their lives. But if there's hundreds of millions of you, you become, if you work in a disciplined way, an unstoppable force. By the way, I think you're starting to see the first signs of that actually happening. And reverting to what Alex and I have said on previous programs, it's interesting to see how nervous the elite in Washington is. They're nervous in ways that I've never seen before, and I understand that the troops are going to be kept in Washington until the fall now. Yeah. At least that's what they're saying.
All right. Okay, guys, I'm going to drop a link, and you guys can jump in and do a call. Once again, I'll recap what I said at the beginning of the live stream. You need a Chrome browser. So if you're on Safari or something like that, it won't work. So you need a Chrome browser. I believe Firefox is okay as well. You can access it on your mobile, though the connection may be a little iffy. Make sure you have headphones. And what else? I think that, and turn your video off. Turn your video off so you can keep your anonymity. And make sure you have the headphones, though, so we don't get any reverb there. So I'm going to drop the link. You'll see the link, and I'll keep on dropping it. And Spartan Warrior Queen may also have it, and also drop it in. You'll go into a waiting room, and then I'll put you in. And let's see how this goes. This is the first time that we're trying it, so let's see how it all works out. And I'll just continue to go through some super chats while we wait for people to jump in. If they jump in, we don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this all turns out.
Absolutely.
So once again, here is the link again, and. Video off, headphones, and a Chrome browser. All right, Alexander.
And you're very welcome to jump in also. I mean, you know, we would be delighted to have you. Whatever, you know, obviously, you're very welcome to come. And we will,
Alexander, let's do a couple more super chats while we wait. And we'll see how this goes. This is a test run, guys. This is just a test run, so let's see how everything goes. From Sparky, President Trump is left in the news. Lest journalists lose their focus and begin reporting what's really going on.
Well, I've heard this thing, you know, that you sort of focus on Donald Trump, and then that means all kinds of terrible things go on around the world, and you don't really report them because Donald Trump is what you really want to just talk about, and it's a diversion. I don't actually fully support that, because what actually has happened is that Donald Trump, perhaps not always fully understanding this, has become the catalyst of people understanding and thinking about many other things. So oddly enough, I think them keeping the focus on Trump is actually, from their point of view, a mistake, because what it's actually doing is it's making people say, well, you know, if Donald Trump says these things, well, actually, I agree with him. So why are they attacking him in that way and trying to silence him and browbeat him, bully him for saying those things? And I agree with him. I support him on those things. And maybe if he's being attacked like that, it's actually an attack on me. Sure. And I think there's an awful lot of that going on too.
Okay, so there are some people already in the waiting room. I believe, Trust, you may want to turn off your video camera, but I could see you in there. You may want to turn off your video, but I see you in the waiting room. Some other people are waiting to connect. It's saying that you have to connect your mic. So connect your mic. Let's go to the first person. Let's add Mahaskala into the stream. Can you hear us, Mahaskala?
Yeah.
Are you there? Mahaskala, are you there? Your mic is on mute. Mahaskala, your mic is on mute, going once, going twice. Okay, well, I'll put you out of the room for now, and let's hope you can get back in. Let's add Jiceman, but I see your mic is also, wait, one sec. Let's try Mahaskala again.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you have to mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh.
Okay, let's try. Okay, no one else. No one else. All right, guys. Okay, well, let me put the link back in there again, and let's go through some more super chats.
So we will certainly come, and this is something we are, keen to try and do. So, as I said, we'll come to it again.
Yeah, well, we'll wait. We have some people trying to connect, but it's saying that they don't have their mic connected, their mic or cam before they're added. You get to a screen and you have to have a mic and your camera, your video, you can turn off. Patricia.
Yes.
Patricia, let's try Patricia. Patricia, are you there? Can you hear us, Patricia? Someone says circle back. No, Patricia is out now as well.
Yes, it may be that there's some technical issues. I should tell our viewers that I'm not good at technical things. Alex is the person who knows all about those things, but I wonder whether.
Let's try Patricia again.
Yes.
Are you there, Patricia?
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Patricia? Hello, Patricia? Okay. No. How about Matt? You have your camera on, Matt. Is that all right? Let me add Matt. Okay, the camera's off now. Let's see. Matt?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yes, Matt. All right.
Yes, well done.
All right.
All right, Matt. Where are you calling from, Matt? And what do you want to discuss?
I'm calling Lisbon, Portugal.
Okay, awesome.
And I appreciate your you both very much. First of all,
you have a question for us, Matt, or you just want to jump in and just be the first one?
And okay, my question is, yes, I have a question.
Okay, we're listening.
When one question I feel, when people say, First Amendment rights and whatever amendment rights, we are losing these liberty rights.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're listening.
What I have not seen anybody addressing, what have you done for these rights? I mean, do you take this? If you take these rights for granted,
Yeah.
If you take these rights for granted,
so the question would be, if you haven't fought for it, yeah. If you haven't fought for it,
yeah. Are you saying, are you worried that they might be lost? Is that your concern, that if you don't fight for your rights, you might lose them? Is that your concern, Matt?
Okay, I think we got the question, Matt. We'll
yes.
What we'll do is we'll answer that question, and we'll get someone else in the room. Thank you, Matt. We'll answer that question, Alexander. Liberty rights. If you don't address them, then they go away.
Absolutely, and I think that's entirely true. I mean, what was it? I mean, Thomas Jefferson may have said, we don't actually know that he actually did say it, but that the price of liberty is perpetual vigilance, and in fact, this is absolutely true. Democracy is a continuous process. It is something that people have to work on all the time, because if you don't, then what you will always get is a group of people who are the insiders, and they will eventually take control, and they will start to strip rights of free speech and protest and those sorts of things away. And those are amongst the first things that they will strip away. There's a very wonderful article, essay by a man called Michels, who's an American thinker from the first half of the 20th century, who talked about the iron rule of oligarchy. He said that political systems have their default is always oligarchy. That's what they revert to, unless people constantly work to renew their democratic systems, their democratic ideas, things like the First Amendment. And people in the United States, and this is something which has always been very impressive to me about the United States, have always, it seems to me, been in conversation, if you like, with the founders and with the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States has always, up to now, been a very living thing. I'm, by the way, not talking about the kind of doctrines that you get on the Supreme Court, which say that you can interpret the Constitution into whatever way you like. What I mean is that the American people live their Constitution, have lived their Constitution. And when they stop doing so, when they stop living the rights that the First Amendment, for example, gives them, it atrophies and dies. And I'm afraid this has to some extent been happening in recent decades, partly because the nature of the attack on these rights has been more sustained and more, shall we say, clever than it has ever been before. We've seen an attempt to strip democracy away, strip free speech rights away, on the basis that you are protecting democracy and protecting free speech, when in fact you're doing the opposite. So I think Americans do need to think about this. They do need to re-engage more actively with their Constitution and with all those amendments, the First Amendment and all those other amendments in their Constitution, which ultimately safeguard their liberties. If they don't do that, if they treat democracy as simply a passive thing and just say to themselves, well, provided I vote every 4 years, everything will remain okay. Well, we've seen in 2020 and in other elections that isn't so.
All right, let's keep this moving. Let's bring in Daniel. Daniel, I'm pulling you in. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Daniel.
We can hear you.
Yes.
All right.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. So, I have a question. So, how likely do you think it is for Eurasianism, for example, to happen, where the world is divided into different civilizations with different economic systems and different cultures, for example, and that's basically like rejection of globalism as it is. How possible do you think that scenario is?
Well, I think, again, excellent question. Can I just say, I think firstly, there's a lot to unpack here, but let's deal with the last question first. I think rejection of globalism is happening, and it's happening in many places, and it's happening at an accelerated way. That's one reason why we see the intensification, if you like, of the attempts to try and impose globalism, because there is so much resistance to it. And that resistance isn't coming only in Eurasianist places. It's coming in the United States, it's coming in Europe, in various countries in Europe, it's coming everywhere, in many places at the same time. And if we talk about, the unipolar and multipolar systems, that famous speech that Putin made back in 2007, when he said this attempt to create a world around one center with one set of rules, one set of values interpreted from one place, that's unsustainable. It cannot work. It won't happen. Now, if we talk about Eurasianism, Eurasianism in Russia is a very, very nebulous concept. Lots of different people hold it. You have left-wing Eurasianists who are associated with the Communist Party. You have right-wing Eurasianists who are associated with Alexander Dugin. You even have some liberal Eurasianists, by the way. So Eurasianism is this idea that Russia itself is not a European nation. It is a Eurasian nation. It has contacts with Asia as well as with Europe. It is its own civilization, and it needs to find its own solutions to its own problems rather than submerge itself in Europe. As I said, within that overall idea, there are many different variations of it. I think this is growing stronger in Russia, and Russia is the place where we talk about Eurasianism where that most applies. But I think also, and this is perhaps a point that you are making a little, is that, of course, Russian Eurasianism is increasingly saying to itself, well, we're not just a distinct civilization, we are in some ways an opponent civilization to the European and American ones. And that means that we need to align ourselves with other countries like China and Iran, which are more hostile to the United States or more different from the United States and Europe than even we are, because ultimately that is our future. That's the kind of culture we have. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're going to see a solid Eurasianist bloc in that way, creating a sort of bipolar world. But I think a reaction against globalism, a reaction against globalization, it's already underway. Certain forms of Eurasianism in Russia will, I think, play to that. But I think what we're going to see is a world with many poles, with independent sovereign countries. And I think we will see that this attempt to try enforce a single system on everyone is already failing and will fail, and is part of an overreach that took place after the Cold War, when certain people in Washington and Brussels and elsewhere overestimated their own power. A long answer, I'm afraid, but yours is an interesting question with many different aspects.
All right. Thank you, Daniel.
That was thank you. That was a great answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Bye.
Take care. All right, let's bring in Zarael. Zarael, you have your mic ready? Right now it says your mic is muted, but I'll bring you in and see if you have your mic back on, Zarael. So Zarael, can you get your mic back on there? All right, great. Zarael, I think you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
Well,
yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. How you doing? What's your question?
Fine, thank you. How are you guys?
We're doing great.
well, great. Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to talk to you guys this way. And I was actually just writing on YouTube because I didn't know if it was working over here. But I just have a comment. It seems that the world is in a very large turmoil at the moment. And it's like a washing machine. You just don't know when it's going to stop and what's going to turn out, because you have China versus the Western Hemisphere. You have Russia versus the Eastern Hemisphere. You have Taiwan. You have Israel. You have so many things happening at the moment. It's just hard to. It's kind of very hard to just keep an overview. But how do you guys actually keep your own overview? What do you pick out as good to report on?
Well, we obviously do read a lot. We have to keep clear eye. But what is it that we keep an eye out for? I think that, first of all, you're absolutely right in saying that the world is in great turmoil at the moment, and that there are different things going on in different places, and that this is clearly a period of transition from one type of international system, or rather an attempt to create a certain international system, to another. And it is the knowledge, the awareness that you have, and which we share, that this is a transition, that makes us look at the events that happen in different countries, and we say to ourselves, how is this something we want to report and talk about? And we say to ourselves, how does it fit into this general picture of this transition, of this change? So when we look at situations in a country like, say, France or Germany or Britain or the United States or Russia, or we talk less about China because we are less familiar with China, but when we look at these sort of countries, we say to ourselves, what sort of position are the political leaders in these countries taking in relation to these events? Are they in favor of one direction? Are they in favor of another? How to explain them in terms of the overall change in the world that is taking place? And I think if you look at our channel overall, you will see that it is in that context that we choose our topics. We consider ourselves, in terms of international relations, to belong very much to the realist school. We consider ourselves in terms of domestic politics, at least I certainly do. We certainly do, as people who are committed to democracy. That leads us to certain positions, which I think are reflected in the way that our channel works. And you can see that is shaping our commentary on particular problems. So when we talk about Macron, when we talk about Angela Merkel, when we talk about Vladimir Putin, when we talk about Donald Trump, we talk about Kamala Harris and Biden and the battles between Trump and McConnell, always we have that overarching issue at the back of our minds all the time. And when you do that, then the world starts to make a great deal of more sense. And the laundry, the washing machine that you said, you can start to see the logic of how it spins.
All right, great. Thank you, Zariel, for that question. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope that was a good answer from Alexander. Take care. All right, take care. Take care, man. Bye-bye. All right, let's bring in Godbody. Godbody. Are you with us, Godbody? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah,
loud
absolutely.
and clear. Loud and clear. What's your question?
Awesome. First of all, I want to say thank you all for the work that you do. It's really important. I've been listening for at least over a year, and I have to say that I'm actually in Houston, Texas. So my question is, do you think there's a possibility that if things continue to go in the direction that they're going, as far as just the politics surrounding the pandemic, is there a possibility that states like Texas and perhaps Florida could start to in the long run could actually detach from the union and become kind of more independent?
Well, first of all, that's a very, very good question. It's a question which I have to say, I think Americans perhaps are better able to answer, because I am not obviously in America, so I don't have that sense of the feel there. But what I will say is this: if you have a government in Washington that imposes policies on the states, on people in the states, which those people reject, and they feel that they're not being listened to, and they also get the sense that there's no way of changing this government, and that this government is, shall we say, either not democratic or imperfectly democratic, then it will result in a reaction. Now, that reaction may be towards states deciding, people and states deciding, this union doesn't work for us anymore. It's not the union that George Washington fought for and which Abraham Lincoln defended. I don't know what your feelings about those people are, but anyway, that's the sort of feeling that some people may have. And that in light of this, we don't think we can be part of that union anymore. Well, I can imagine a situation where that could occur. And remember, the Declaration of Independence, the American Declaration of Independence, essentially justifies that approach. It says, that if governments are created amongst men, I don't remember the exact wording, in order to protect people, to look after their rights. When governments become intolerable, there is a right on the part of the people to revolution, to take action, to dissolve those bonds with those governments. Now, I very much hope this doesn't happen with the United States. I would not personally want to see the United States break up. I don't want to see secession happen. Of course, there is a very powerful juridical and constitutional view that says that secession cannot happen and that states that secede are rebellious states. That's the position that was taken, as you no doubt know, in the 1860s by Abraham Lincoln and the federal government and many people in the North at that time. I absolutely do not want to see secession in the United States take place. But I will say this, if things continue with on the lines of things being imposed, which are very contested and very disputed, in the way that they have been up to now, you will see pushback, you will see resistance, and you might start to see things like the kind of things that you talked about starting to take place. Or it may be that within the constitutional setup, you will get something else. You will start to see states which will say, well, we're not going to completely secede from the United States, but we are going to detach ourselves from the US as much as possible. And if the US government starts to impose its ideas upon us, we will simply not apply them. And that has been known to happen in some federal unions also. I hope we don't come to that, because, of course, that would be a very, very bad, troubling thing in itself. But, what was it Lincoln said? A house divided against itself cannot stand. How a house that cannot stand falls down, that can take many forms. I hope it doesn't fall down. I devoutly hope it doesn't fall down in the case of the United States. I think it's closer to doing that than at any time in its history since the 1860s.
Absolutely.
Right, awesome. Okay, great. Thank you, Godbody, for that question.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Take care.
You too.
All right, let's bring in, let's see, who's waiting now? Alan Watson.
Hi,
Are you
guys.
there, Alan?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very, very
Terrific. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for your reporting over the past year. It's been brilliant, especially on US politics and the state of society in the United States. My question, there's so much I want to ask you, but I'll limit it to one thing, and that concerns the UK, and that is over Brexit and the terrible, terrible bias of the establishment in the UK against Trump. Over Brexit, it seems that democracy is not working in the UK. Many of the problems we have in the UK, our cities, immigration, all kinds of problems are not being dealt with by Parliament in any open way. Do you think democracy is on the decline in the UK? And if so, what should we do about it? And thank you once again.
Thank you, Alan. Alexandra, this is right down your alley.
And a great pleasure, by the way, to be speaking to someone on these topics, because I think democracy was under real danger in Britain. And I was getting very, very concerned about the situation, because if you remember, in 2016, we had a referendum in Britain where the British people, a majority of the British people, voted to leave the European Union. And the government promised them, it actually wrote to them before the referendum. I got the letter from the government, as everybody else did, which said, if you vote to leave, we will leave. And then there was this sustained attempt by the British political establishment, backed by nearly the entirety of the media, to try to overturn that, to try and change things round. We had this extraordinary campaign for a second referendum, which was really a rerun of the first. And you had the Labour Party saying, well, we're going to renegotiate the deal with Brussels. We're going to put that to what we call a second referendum. Only we're not going to back in that referendum the deal we're going to agree with Brussels. We're going to campaign to remain in the European Union. In other words, they were looking for a way to erase the result of the first referendum. Now, when things like that happen, you have to be extremely worried about the state of democracy in a country. Now, in this instance, is this one instance, the democratic antibodies, if you like, in Britain proved strong enough, ultimately, to prevent that. But it was also, to a great extent, the result of chance. Boris Johnson's opponents in the House of Commons, and I'm not building up Johnson here to be some sort of Churchillian figure. I mean, what I'm simply saying, at that particular moment, he was the person who was going to carry Brexit forward. But his enemies in the House of Commons made a whole series of missteps. And as a result, he was able to get an election in which the British people were able to have a vote and have their say. But the very fact that it came so close to being cancelled is a huge warning sign. And it shows you that the condition of democracy in Britain is not healthy. And you're quite right, there are lots of other issues, lots of other things that are going on in Britain. I mean, you see all kinds of things going on. You mentioned immigration, where people have their strong views and strong feelings, and where those feelings, again, are not really being articulated by the political class in any coherent way. And you can talk about this on all kinds of other topics. And that does make one worried that the political class is not so much interested in democracy anymore, doesn't really see itself as defending a democracy that all of us understand as democracy, a democracy in which they are accountable to the people and they are responsive to what the people think. Rather, they see democracy as a system which gives power to them so that they can impose on everyone else what they think. And if that is the case, then democracy is indeed in decline. Certainly, we need to be extremely worried and very concerned about the state of democracy in Britain, especially as a result of what happened in 2019. Now, coming back to what Thomas Jefferson perhaps said, the price of democracy is perpetual vigilance. It's true. It's true in Britain. It's true in other places. I think because democracy became so entrenched in Britain for so long, we became very complacent about it. And in 2019, it nearly slipped out of our hands.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Alan, for that question.
Thank
Great to hear
you. Thank you, guys.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.
Hey, thank
Yes.
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Have a great day. All right. Let's bring in Amrit. I'm going to add you to the stream. Amrit, here you go.
Hello?
Amrit, are you with us?
Hello.
Yes, we hear you. Can you hear us?
Given Iranian history,
Yes.
given Iranian history, can you think that US can defeat Iran in a war?
Well,
interesting question.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Now, of course, what does victory over Iran actually mean? I mean, right. I mean, the United States is the most militarily powerful country in the world. If it were to set out to destroy Iran, well, it can. I mean, it can. But sorry, but let me finish. I mean, let me just say. I mean, is that actually though a victory? I mean, that kind of victory would not be a victory over Iran. It will be a catastrophe. It would be a catastrophe for the United States too. Can the United States occupy and hold Iran, a mountainous country of 80 million people with a diverse population, a very highly educated, by the way, and sophisticated population? The answer is, I'm sure it cannot. Can it attack Iran in other ways that can cause Iran considerable hurt and damage? Yes, it can. But again, in that kind of situation, in a situation of limited war, Iran can also fight a limited war on its own terms in its own region. So I think when you look at it, you can see very clearly that for the United States, there is no good military option with respect to Iran. And it is extremely worrying and very concerning indeed that there are some people in Washington who seem to think otherwise. Now, you know, people may have different views about the Iranian government and the kind of things that it does. But I repeat again what we always say on this program. We are realists. And that means understanding that with Iran, there are certain limits placed on what you can do. Because Iran has its own power. It has its own military, its own large population, its large territory. And that means that you should not be seeking military solutions against it. I don't think economic solutions in the form of the kind of sanctions which we are talking about work either. I think that given the kind of country that Iran is, a political dialogue on many issues is a much more sensible way to go. I hope I have answered your question, and I think it's a good question, and I think many people in the United States need to go away and think about this very carefully before they wander into all kinds of situations with Iran, which may cause absolute unbelievable tragedy and huge disaster going forward.
Yes, and also we know that Greeks under Alexander was able to overcome Iran.
Well,
in a great way. America is not that much. You can't see that technology always helps. See in Vietnam that they were able to defeat America, and in Serbia too.
Yeah, I mean, that was with Alexander the Great, that was then, and, you know, that was a long time ago. I mean, that was a different world, a completely different type of system in those days. And by the way, I mean, it's important to remember, Alexander the Great went to Iran, conquered Iran, married an Iranian woman, was very attracted to aspects of Iranian culture, and he made a big impression on the Iranian people. But ultimately, Iran came back. I mean, it was a conquest that was ephemeral. I mean, Iran was still there afterwards. So, you know, one shouldn't, I think, say that because Alexander was able to do it all those centuries ago, all those thousands of years ago, we can do it now, or that we even should even think about doing it now. I think this would be an extremely bad and very dangerous idea. And again, military solutions for political problems are not usually the good way. The military of the United States exists for one overriding purpose, which is to protect the United States and to defend the American people. It is not for carrying out regime change policies in places like Iran. So I think you need to be very careful about wars with Iran. I think there are things the Iranian government might want to consider about what it's been doing too, and whether they work for Iran, but that's an internal Iranian matter, which, however, Iran can discuss both with its neighbors and with the United States. I'm not giving anyone carte blanche here, but the idea of war, of if you like, an aggressive or preemptive war, that is an extremely bad idea altogether. Otto von Bismarck, a great realist statesman, once put it very well. Those who pursue preemptive war are all too often picking suicide in order to avoid death. Preemptive war of this kind is a very bad idea.
All right. Okay, Amrit, thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. Take care. All right. We got a lot of people lined up, so we'll get these people that are waiting, Alexander, and we'll get to super chats because we get really great super chats as well. So we'll clear out everyone that's waiting. We'll get to super chats and we'll wrap everything up. This has been great. Everything's working out great. Let me bring in Bomio. Bomio, your mic is muted, but I'll bring you in and let's see if you get the mic unmuted. Bomio, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome.
Thanks for taking my call. I've been following you guys for so many years now, so great work. Please, with the color revolutions and how people were treated outside the US, now that US citizens can see what their government did in most countries, almost being done to them, what do you think this is going to affect? And I'm talking about individuals' politics, individual Americans' politics, yeah, especially also the white race. I am mentioning that because I am an African. I'm speaking from an African point of view. When we were growing up, most of us used to look up to the US. I can tell you that today, my immediate family, friends, and in Africa, when we talk about family, we talk about extended family. Yeah. We have a standard of living equal or almost equal to the US. And we see what is happening to people. Their advantages that they have is being eroded. We can't believe it. You know, friends don't say this, I want to go to the US. You know, so how do you think this is going to affect individual people, their politics?
That's a fantastic question.
It's a fantastic
you're right too, Alexander. Bobio, you're right. A lot of people, I'll say in Greece as well, a lot of people used to look at the US and say, I got to get there, but now not so much anymore. Alexander.
I can remember as a child when Americans, when we looked up in Greece, in the United States, I'm talking about the Greece of the 60s, and it was this extraordinary, wonderful civilization. I remember reading as a child in the 60s, everything American that I could lay my hands on, you know, from comic books, you know, Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and all that, going to the American bases. I remember being taken there with my father and, you know, being open-eyed with astonishment at how well run and they were, and how different they were from everything else that I knew in the Greece of that time. We still had large numbers of bases in those days. And now, I think that's absolutely right. I think people around the world are less impressed, far less impressed by the United States, by America, than they used to be, because, of course, other societies have moved forward and developed, and this has been a wonderful thing, and this is a great thing. And the great paradox of this is that exactly as this has happened, some people in Washington, D.C., on the contrary, seem to want to interfere in other countries even more. They want to use that enormous power that the United States still has to involve itself in their affairs, in the affairs of other countries, not realizing that those countries have developed and matured and changed, and people in those countries are both far less impressed by the United States than they used to be. It doesn't mean that they're hostile, exactly as you said. It doesn't mean they're hostile to the United States or negative towards it, or that they wouldn't visit it, or that they aren't attracted to a lot of things that America still has to offer. But they're not in awe of it in the way that they once were. And instead of people in Washington understanding that and focusing on America's problems and building up its democracy and its democratic institutions, which are the things about the United States which people around the world most admire, they are instead intent on interfering in the things that happen elsewhere and at the same time undermining those democratic institutions within the United States, which are what people around the world most admire. And that makes people around the world admire and respect the United States even less, because the United States then starts looking not just, you know, less like the United States and more like their own countries, which already in material terms is true, but also more like their own countries in political terms and constitutional and legal terms, with the difference that their countries are going forward and improving, whereas the United States, from a far higher point, is actually regressing. So it's, I think you've made an absolutely brilliant point, actually. I think you are completely right. And I think it's something that American people need to understand. The United States is still the wealthiest country in the world. It's still got amazing institutions. What it needs to do is to develop them and build them, not worry all the time about what other people are doing in other places, when those other people are able to sort out their problems more often than not by themselves.
All right.
Let me give you two other points, and if you want to elaborate on that as well, then I close it off. Yeah. Look, I am a child of the 60s, and actually my first name is John Kennedy. This is just how popular the US was in the 60s. Yeah. And one other thing I have noticed is that, you know, if you look at the quality of decision making, the people that won the Second World War for the world, if you look at the quality of their decision making and you compare it to the decision making of today, you ask yourself, what are decision makers today, especially in the West, what are they trying to achieve?
Yes.
It's very, very, very confusing. From an African point of view, look, we have gone through the 60s and all the nightmares we have. We have some stability today. But you look at what is happening with the elite in the West, it brings up a whole lot of questions and saying, what is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Is this the way to do it? If you want to elaborate on that. And thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.
You're absolutely, can I thank you again? And again, you're absolutely right. And of course, the United States, you've seen a decline in leadership, definitely, and very strange decisions. But you see the same in Europe too. I mean, you know, talking about the wartime generation, where are the de Gaulles? Where are the Churchills? Well, of course, Churchill was an unusual personality, and many Africans may have strong feelings about him. And I understand why, by the way. But he was a powerful personality. So was de Gaulle. So was Adenauer, so was Helmut Schmidt, so were Willy Brandt, so were so many people in Europe. And today it's a desert. And again, I link that to the decline, both in the United States and Europe, in our democratic institutions. Because when democracy isn't functioning, what you throw up are political leaders who are subservient to the elite class, rather than have to go out and voice the views of the people and relate to them. And that in time leads to a decline in leadership. That's my own view anyway. You
still have some great leaders today. You know, Orban is definitely on that list, in my opinion. Absolutely, Vladimir Putin. I think we're seeing perhaps one of the greatest leaders, the greatest leader of our generation. And of course, I will mention, just to wrap it up, this question, and we'll get to Logos. I'll add you in next, Logos. Donald Trump. I'll just say my point real quick, Alexander, is I fell out of love with the U.S. under the Obama years. And I liked Obama when he first got into office because, I mean, as I think everybody that voted for Obama, we had very high expectations. Yeah. And, you know, once the war machine started up with Obama, I was just like, he's no different than Bush. It's just the same old story.
Yeah.
I fell back in love with the United States with Trump.
Yes.
And Trump, to me, really brought a lot of the magic of the U.S. back and the promise of the U.S. back. And what happened?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't get to a second term. So, I mean, on the flip side, America had that great leader, and we're not going to get into the reasons why. Everyone understands what happened, but you couldn't get to a second term. So anyway, that was a great question.
Yeah.
Bomio, thank you very much. Logos, I am going to add you into the stream here. Logos, can you hear us? Are you there? Yes, we can. How you doing?
Yes.
What's your question? How are things going?
Yeah, I think I've identified what the problem is. I think democracy and everything about it has been corrupted on every level. For example, even just politicians who are sworn in, you're seeing them being sworn in on just like coloring books and Qurans and stuff like that. It's a nation under God, not a nation under a crayon or a law, right? And then you have sworn enemies of the United States and countries that are sworn enemies who are actually politicians in the U.S. as well. Who, AOC hates the United States. I mean, there's just nothing to her that's redeemable about the states. You have all these special interest groups and all these corporations that are all just doing everything they can to undermine democracy. And we know what big tech has done. So all these things are corrupting the United States or democracy as a whole. So how can we root this out?
Yeah, I mean, can I just say, first of all, I mean, that is a very realistic understanding of the bad state things in the US, but it is always important, and I always say this, never to give way to despair, because that's always in the end a dead, that's a dead end. I mean, you have to say to yourself, these are the problems. I've got to worry. I'm worrying about these problems. I'm talking about them. What you will very quickly discover when you do is there are lots of other people see these problems also. Ultimately, most people, at some level, see these problems. If you all start talking and work together, then, of course, then you become a major political force. Now, that has happened in the United States before. There have been times in American history when things didn't look well. I mean, we've talked about the 1860s and the build up to the events of the 1860s. We saw similar problems at other times in the US. There were times in the 1880s and 1890s when people were also very pessimistic about the future of the US. There was, by the way, a disputed election in the US in 1876. And yet, in the end, things somehow worked their way through. People found a way. People found a way of re-engaging with each other, reactivating that dialogue that I said existed between the American people and their constitution, clearing out the special interests. I mean, if you remember what Theodore Roosevelt and the progressives were all about at that time, putting the trusts in their place, breaking up Standard Oil, which is, this seemingly enormously powerful company that was dominating the US oil industry at one time, dealing with these sort of problems. And I think if you think in these positive terms, that this is a challenge that must be faced and faced down, and that the Constitution ultimately and the political system that has existed in the United States is there in the end on my side, if I can just make it work again, then I think the American people can find an answer to these things. And yes, Trump wasn't able to get a second term, but sometimes, very often, you find that a project, that a movement, before it wins, has to suffer some defeats in order that it can understand better the scale of the challenge it is facing. And that, by the way, in my opinion, is what we're seeing now. We're seeing a reverse, a defeat, definitely, a reverse. And then there's a sort of gathering back. People are talking to each other. People are thinking. People are debating things. They've seen the extent to which the mask, if you like, has fallen. And they're going to come back. And they're going to come back stronger than they were before.
I agree.
Do you think that we should, revise the Constitution so that it can't be, interpreted in a leftist way where it's just fluid, or ban politicians who from being elected who refuse to swear on the Bible?
Well, I have to say, I mean, there's an awful lot about the things that have been done to the Constitution recently, which I would be extremely concerned about if I was an American. And I mean, this is where, if you like, the originalists have come in, which you've started to see in a form of judicial and legal theories, which is actually, all this talk about the Constitution being a living document. And I really wanted to distinguish that from the things that I was saying before. What they mean when they talk about a living document is that they mean that you can reinterpret it as in ways that allow you to shape your society in the way that you want to go. And the result is to take the Constitution in ways that are radically different from the original intentions of the founders, certainly, but arguably very different from what the Constitution says in its plain text and how it relates to democracy and to the American people. You can end up having the Constitution appear to mean something which is the opposite of what it actually means if you go down that road. So absolutely, you need to defend your Constitution. You need to argue all the time that these interpretations of the Constitution that are being made are simply not true. That the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is what we were talking about previously with the first question, the first speaker, actually means what it says. It doesn't mean, for example, that we can remove somebody from our discussion because we find what he says makes some of us uncomfortable. It actually allows us to go and protest peacefully and lawfully in places. And that is what the Constitution, that is what the First Amendment says. And you can go through all the amendments, you can go through all the clauses of the Constitution, and you can say that, and you can do it, and you can understand and explain to people in that case that it is a guide for action, it is a guarantee of democracy, it is the centerpiece of our political system, and we should cherish and protect it, and always remember, if we believe in democracy, the promise that it makes to us, and certainly protect it from misinterpretations that have become all too current in recent years.
All right, Logos, thank you very much. How can we say?
Sorry?
How can we safeguard that?
Well, through democratic action, through, for example, ensuring a president is elected, who we are sure will appoint judges who are going to implement the Constitution properly.
I laugh, Alexander, because a president who's elected is going to make well, okay.
And then
everyone that's watching this stream, and Logos, everyone that's watching this stream knows exactly why we're giggling a little bit.
Absolutely.
Look.
I mean, we're working on. I mean, when I talk about the First Amendment and my feelings about this, I mean, it's partly because we have to talk in ways which perhaps we wouldn't otherwise do. That's
Alexander. That's going back to Logos. I'm gonna add someone else to the stream. Thank you for your questions. We're going to continue to answer this question because this is a really interesting question. All right.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah. Bye now.
Alexander, the interesting part is that here we are being careful, and Logos is right. We're being careful about what we have to say.
Yeah.
because of how far things have degraded.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting point in that what Logos is saying is really interesting, because I don't think ever in the history of the United States have we seen so many powerful forces aligned against, say, the Constitution. Let's just leave it there, the Constitution or American values. I mean, real powerful forces, big tech, the censorship, the deep state, the war machine, like our topic today. I mean, these are really powerful forces. And I think even the founding fathers would have never imagined a company like Google or Facebook or stuff like this going on, or these forces aligned against the country and against changing everything about what the U.S. stands for. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch it play out. But I mean, real quick, what do you think of what I said? And we'll add in and just real quick, we'll add in Lips and the Cub. We got Thanasi and we got Moon Swan Silverlight, and then we'll get to super chats and we'll wrap it up.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. I don't think there has ever been an array of forces that have been so strong and so dangerous. And I think if the founders had looked upon this, they would have been very worried and disturbed. They would be very worried and very disturbed indeed. I mean, they'd be shocked, actually. And here's the interesting thing. All of these forces that you are talking about, they're mounting this attack, but they still feel obliged to pay lip service to the Constitution, to democracy, to all these things that we've been talking about. They attack these things even as they pretend to defend them. And that, in a way, if you think about it, is an admission of weakness. They know that if they came forward and represented themselves simply as what they are, they would lose, because they would then lose that support, that residual support that they still have amongst the American people. And in fact, what happened over the last, shall we say, 5 years, but especially over the last year, is that they have got to that point when they have been exposed for what they are, as they have never been exposed before. And that actually puts them in a position of weakness and explains why they feel as nervous as they do. So we mustn't look at this thing and say to ourselves, yes, its power is enormous, which it is, but the battle is lost, because it's not. I mean, the battle, which is a political battle, it's an intellectual battle. It's a battle that has to be fought through organization and through the Constitution, and the law can still be won, because all those things are still there against these forces, even as those forces have to pretend that that they're actually aligned with it.
Yeah. If they weren't scared, they wouldn't build barbed wire fences around the Capitol. They wouldn't continue to have troops there.
Absolutely.
Excellent question, Logos. Thank you for that. We're gonna add little Panda and the Cub. Little Panda and the Cub.
Yeah.
Hello.
You're on deck. Yes.
It's
How are you doing?
Panda Cub. I'm from Norway, so that's cool.
All right.
Watching
Awesome.
you guys for a year.
How are things in Norway?
It's lockdown, I guess.
It's locked down.
They're emptying our sovereign welfare fund to pay for everything. But it's fine.
Lockdown and emptying the
we get paid. We're getting paid from the state and from the government.
All right.
So
okay.
That's not a problem.
All right. What's your question?
I don't have a question.
Or comment.
I forgot. But okay, I gotta ask you this question: Where can I buy those T-shirts or shirts you're wearing?
Oh, that's a great question. Duran Shop. You'll find the link right under this video. DRNSHOP.com.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Can I just say, I mean, Norway is a phenomenal country. It is incredibly beautiful. It has a wonderful literature and a great music and an amazing cuisine also, by the way, which people don't really know. So it is a phenomenal country. It is one that the British people have always felt particularly strongly close to. And many people in Britain of a certain generation, of my mother's generation, for example. My mother was Greek, but she lived in Britain at that time. Remember the king of Norway, who came to Britain at that time during the war. And of course, we still have every winter, every Christmas in Trafalgar Square, the Christmas tree that we get from the people of Norway, and it is highly appreciated here.
Oh, that's true. But just one comment. Well, Norway is in decline right now because we just had our first sentence. Someone got sentenced for attack on democracy in Norway.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So, and that was not a terror attack. It was just like 10 people. So yeah.
Good grief. Well, I hope it comes through because, as I said, great affection for Norway here in Britain and for the Norwegian people.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, little Panda Cup. Thank you very much. Take care. All right, let's bring in Thanasi. Thanasi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you.
Okay.
How are things going?
Oh, good. I'm in New York. I'm also, awesome. I guess, Greek diaspora like you.
Awesome.
My question is centered on myths and euphemisms, or how much we have to be careful, maybe in your analysis, because I respect your guys' analysis. I subscribe, I watch the videos. How much of our analysis of wanting to care about democracy, for instance, is wrapped up in our own concepts of our own cultural myths, or what we think we have to care about? Because I'm listening to you guys, and I've listened to dozens of hours, but particularly in this stream, you guys are centering on democracy. And for instance, so great leaders, we have no more. That was kind of a theme for about 10, 15 minutes. But then you go on to say Orban and Putin are examples of great leaders today, or de Gaulle of the past, or Eleftherios Venizelos. They all don't really have a fetish for democracy if it doesn't benefit them.
Well,
good.
It's a very good question. It is a very, very, very good question, because of course democracy. This is actually an important point, because of course you can create a myth about democracy. The kind of people who create myths about democracy, and you read lots of articles about this, are very often people who don't recognize that democracy is actually a very practical thing. If you look at the Constitution of the United States, again, I return always to the Constitution, because of course we're talking about a lot about the United States in these programs. If you look at the Constitution of the United States, the thing that stands out for me about it is what a simple and very practical document it actually is. It actually says what should be done in particular situations and circumstances. In every article, it says, what the president is, what the Congress does, and all of those sort of things. It's actually very efficient and very practical indeed. And there is no ceremonial or mythological or mythical aspect of it, because the people who wrote the Constitution were extremely practical people. They were not, people who were, abstract conceptualists or people who thought in abstract terms. And one of the problems that we see today is, and this is what I think, if you like, a certain type of people who attack democracy do today, is that, of course, they substitute this very practical reality for how democracy is with the more mythologizing of democracy that I think you're talking about. So they separate democracy and they talk about it in abstract terms, whilst actually suppressing its practical realities, which is people voting, people speaking, people protesting, people doing all the kind of things that democracy is all about. And it's also the case that sometimes those people who practice democracy are those who talk about it less, and who are, in fact, in some ways, people who are always thinking about it in a more critical way. Thinking about de Gaulle, for example, who's a leader that I experienced, I remember him and whom I've read a great deal about because he was always somebody who interested me. I mean, he was always saying to himself, well, you know, is democracy ultimately the way forward? Does it really work? Is this the sort of thing that I can actually work with? But he did this in a very honest way. And in the end, he always came back and said to himself, yes, it is, because it is the most practical way forward. And that meant that he would go out, talk to the people, and always work to win them over to his side. I am just old enough to remember as a very, very young child watching de Gaulle addressing the French people. I didn't speak French at that time, but you could still see the force of his personality coming out and talking to the French people and say to them, French men and women, I want you to support me to do this, that, and the rest. And that was a democratic politician in action, in my opinion. Practical, understanding the limits, if you like, of his own power, understanding where he had to look to for support, understanding that he needed the support of the French people if he was to move his policies forward. And that was de Gaulle, and that was democratic leadership, practical democratic leadership in the modern world.
I think I understand what you're saying. I still think, though, that therefore we're kind of using democracy as it means many things to different people. We could be, maybe we're talking over each other when we're discussing it with other people. It maybe ties back into issues of euphemism. Yeah. To be more precise in the language, perhaps we would have to break apart different styles of democracy and have different terminologies for them. Because generally, I think your guys' analysis are spot on. That's why I listen to you guys when I'm doing my laundry, dishes. I put you guys in the background. But there is a bias, particularly in the English-speaking world, so it's not really just you guys, for, I think, this gravitation towards euphemism, lockdowns versus martial law, late-term abortion versus child sacrifice, enhanced interrogation versus torture. It's in the culture of our language. We do it constantly. And I think with democracy, I think we do it too. We do it where we...
Well, I'm afraid now you're posing a question that is an enormous one, perhaps greater than we can really talk about here. But I mean, there's also the question of language. And I should say that my wife is an academic who is a teacher of English. I mean, she's an authority on D.H. Lawrence and all kinds of modernist writers. And I mean, she could talk to you lots and lots about euphemism and language. But I think this is such a vast topic that is perhaps one that we could perhaps look at in more detail in a single program, because if we talk about that, I can see that we could be here for a very, very long time.
Alexander,
I will say,
let me.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Alexander.
I mean, one of the things that I would quickly finish on this with is that, of course, one of the things that Confucius, who was not a Democrat, but he was very keen about this, and it was understood, by the way, it was known about by some Western scholars who were Democrats. He always insisted that words should be given precise meanings. And he always said that if you don't do that and words become slippery, then that will mean that things then start to be changed in ways that are dangerous and you might not like. He talked about the rectification of words and language. Interesting subject, and one perhaps to talk about. Alex, you wanted to say?
Yeah, all right. Thanasi, I'll let you go now, and I'm going to bring in Moonswan Silverlight.
Thank you, guys.
Real soon. Thank you very much. But I'm going to jump on what Thanasi said because he makes an interesting point. And my question is to you, Alexander. Democracy is different depending on where you are in the culture, and I'll bring in the point of Orban and Putin. And you can speak. I'm sure you understand what democracy means to Putin and to Russia, which is a very different concept than what it is for the United States. Yes. And I'll venture to say that Putin is someone that does believe in democracy, even though in Russia the concept is, number one, very new. People forget that it's a country that's 25 years now as a democratic country. So it's a very new concept. And also, when you look at the culture and the language, it forms a different type of style of democracy and of rule, where maybe someone on the outside may look at it more as authoritarian, but in Russia, it's something that the Russian people may value more as having a stronger type of leader, but who they know, if they do want to replace that leader, they can. I mean, I'm speaking very general, but maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Moonswan Silverlight will bring you in and we'll wrap up the calls, and we'll get to a lot of awesome super chats next.
I mean, this is a very, very profound point, because, of course, one fundamental difference, by the way, between Russia and, say, a country like the United States is that Russia is not a legalistic society in the way that the United States is. So there is no foundation document like the Constitution, which actually programs it in a kind of way. And, of course, Russia has been a country that's been evolving in a certain contradictory sometimes directions over a very long time. It is not built around its constitution in the way that the United States is. So obviously, they've had to work towards democracy in profoundly different ways to the way that is the case in the United States. But, and you raise an important point, because I think they are working towards democracy. They do see their political system evolving continuously in a more democratic direction. Putin is in constant dialogue with his people. And when you see him talking to them and relating to them, it is very clear that he is ultimately extremely conscious that he can only be their leader if they continue to support him. That was not the case, say, 50, 60, 70 years ago, when Stalin, for example, was the leader of the Soviet Union. I mean, Stalin barely spoke as leader of the Soviet Union to people in Russia at all. And if you go back further still, well, of course, when Russia was a monarchy and an autocracy, then again, in those days, the Tsar didn't talk to the people in the way that Putin does. So you see an evolving situation, and there is always a dialogue between the people and the leader today, which never existed before. It makes the leader stronger, but it also means that there are limitations on him. And that's an essential point. Democracy means limitations on the leader, on what the leader can do. And it also means accountability, ultimately, to those people upon whose his support depends. Now, there is much more, and I'm certainly not going to say that Russian democracy is perfect or anywhere close to perfect. It is still working towards in that direction, but you can see it doing so. Yes, Alex.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up here, and I'll just make a point, jumping on what you said. That's what made Trump, to me, such a dynamic political figure, is those rallies.
Absolutely.
Those rallies where he was actually talking and having a conversation with the people, unscripted. You know, yes, he would say a lot of funny things. Sometimes he would say a lot of things that maybe, people didn't like, but still it was unscripted and it was a dialogue. And it was that feedback of the people, that energy of the people, that I thought was absolutely innovative.
Yes.
For a lack of simple, but innovative. And it was refreshing coming from the Obama years, where Obama was a very scripted, stage managed type of politician. I mean, they stage managed everything about him. And then came Trump, and he would have these rallies, and it was just this give and take, this constant, back and forth, where I was just like, this is a once in a lifetime type of politician.
Absolutely correct. But of course, by the way, it's important to say that Trump, as in so much else, was in this like American politicians used to be. This very scripted, ceremonial, stiff type of politics that you see in the United States on the part of elite politicians now, the Mitch McConnells, the Hillary Clintons, the Barack Obamas, all those sorts of people. That is something completely different from how American politicians used to be. And as in so much else, Donald Trump represents what was the American norm, the democratic norm, but which the elite today utterly and completely rejects. They call it populism, which is a completely meaningless term. I've never really understood what the exact definition of this term is, but in my opinion, what it shows when they talk about populism is that fundamentally they don't like politicians who are popular and who are able to speak to the people. And of course, populus comes from the Roman populus, the word populus in Latin, which means the people. That's what that is all about. So Trump relates to the people in ways that they don't and never will and cannot do.
Okay, let's bring in our last caller, which is Mood Swan Silverlight. Mood Swan Silverlight, can you hear us? Are you there?
Hello, lads.
Hello, Mood Swan Silverlight. Good to hear you. How are you doing? What's your question?
I'm fine, thank you. First of all, I would just like to say thank you so much for all your hard work and effort into the channel. Really appreciate it. And it's just a quick question, but we all know that China is a real threat to democracy. I'm just wondering about North Korea. Is that much of a threat, or?
Well, we did a program about North Korea, and I think it is a threat, actually. Now, I mean, let's put aside the sort of issues that we're talking about, but North Korea has been absolutely frantically busy over the last couple of years building up its nuclear forces. I mean, it's now got strategic intercontinental ballistic missiles, road mobile. I mean, it showed one on display. It's able now to hit the United States and move things around. It's developed new generations of combat tanks, and it's talking about creating nuclear ballistic missile submarines. North Korea is a real problem. I mean, it's not just a problem. I don't think it's a threat to democracy in America, because nobody in their senses would want to copy, it seems to me, the North Korean political system. But it is definitely a major military challenge, and a growing one. Now, Donald Trump understood that. He actually said that Barack Obama, who completely mismanaged, by the way, the whole North Korean thing, all of these weapon systems that I've been talking about were clearly designed during the time of Obama's presidency. So Obama nonetheless told Trump on the day that they met after Trump's election that North Korea was the greatest issue that the United States faced. Trump actually tried to do something about it. He met with Kim Jong-un. He had discussions with Kim Jong-un. It didn't lead very far, but at least there was some kind of a dialogue, an attempt to understand what the North Koreans were all about, an attempt to try and work out some kind of solution, an American solution to this. Maybe not, maybe he never really found what that solution was, but he was at least looking for one. What has the Biden administration done about North Korea? Absolutely nothing. Has Joe Biden actually said what he's going to do about North Korea, what his ideas are, what his policies are? We don't know. And in my opinion, North Korea is today the biggest potential military challenge to the United States and indeed to the world system. Because yes, I entirely agree. I don't think North Korea is looking to start a war itself, because I think it understands that doing so would be suicidal. But it exists entirely outside the international system. Most Western countries don't have good diplomatic relations with it. We have very few contacts with the North Korean leadership. We don't know what it thinks from one day to the next. They probably don't know very much about what our governments are thinking. We don't know what the purpose of this military buildup is. It has all sorts of ideas which we don't really understand and relate to, and a system, a country that is militarily so powerful and at the same time economically perhaps so unstable that operates outside the international system is definitely a danger. And the Biden administration, if it was really concerned about international security and peace and preserving peace would be prioritizing the problem of North Korea and not seeking instead these reckless adventures in the Middle East where there is nothing to be gained by pursuing them. So I agree with you. I think North Korea is a danger. I don't think it's a danger, as I said, to our political systems, but it is certainly a military danger, a military strategic danger, and one which, as it continues to grow, is going to complicate arms control negotiations between the United States and China, between the United States and Russia, evermore.
All right. Moon Swan Silverlight, thank you very much for that question. Great to hear you.
Thank you. Thanks, lads.
Take care. Take care. Have a great day. All right, Alexander, let's get to some super chats. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of good super chats waiting. Mm-hmm. Let's see. We have Patricia Klein. What do you think Putin thinks of the whole situation with the U.S. leadership and the general goings on in the U.S.?
Well, that's an excellent question. Well, Putin himself is always extremely careful about what he says. But we had some very interesting comments from Lavrov, and this all comes from this famous interview that he gave to this Russian journalist, Vladimir Solovyov. And first of all, Lavrov spoke in highly complimentary terms about Donald Trump, said, that he was a strong and remarkable personality. And clearly Lavrov liked him. Then he and Solovyov got to a discussion about the impeachment proceedings. Lavrov made it absolutely crystal clear that he thought the impeachment was ridiculous and absurd. This was whilst the impeachment, by the way, was underway. And he made it perfectly clear that he thought that the entire political system was in the United States had gone completely off the rails. So that's what I think that's what Lavrov said he thinks. Lavrov meets with Putin regularly, and obviously he works for Putin. So I think what Lavrov says is a very clear guide to what Putin thinks. I think Putin and Lavrov and the rest of the Russian leadership look at the situation in the United States and they think the United States has gone completely off the rails.
All right. Thank you very much for that super chat. Patricia, let's see, from Cora Marine, $25 super chat. Thank you both for your honest and education opinions. Thank you very much, Cora Marine, for that super chat. From Sparky, although revolutionary independence is accurate. Interesting point. Thank you very much, Sparky, for that super chat as well. From Amrit, 100 super chat. Iran, with its difficult terrain and great military expertise and technology, can defeat America. Don't you think so? This is the question that Amrit had when he called in. You answered that.
I think so. I think so. I think occupying Iran would be an impossible task to pose to the U.S. military. I think Iran, by the way, would be completely misguided if it overestimated the importance of that. If Iran recklessly begins a war in the Middle East, especially with the United States, then of course it will face disaster too. But certainly an occupation of Iran by the United States as part of some preemptive war would be impossible. That I have no doubt.
Yeah. From Moon Swan Silverlight, a super sticker. Thank you very much, Moon Swan Silverlight. Great question on North Korea as well. Great to hear you. From Amrit again, it was the question that he called in, actually a comment. It is a great comment. He says, Greeks protected Europe in antiquity from Persians and from Islamic invasion during the medieval times. Oh, wow. The Greek Byzantine Empire, and still do. Great people. Thank you very much, Amrit, for that super chat. It was great to hear you and listen to your comments. From Flying Boar, a $5 super chat. Update on Nord Stream 2, Alexander.
Well, it's all getting very interesting with Nord Stream 2 because, of course, the Fortuna, which is the Russian pipelines ship, is now at work. But I think actually it's taken some time off, but it's laid more pipes in Danish waters. And as I said, they're moving forward towards completing it. There's supposed to be this intricate negotiation going on between the Germans and the Americans about it. with the Germans apparently offering to saying that they, if Russians switch off gas to Ukraine, they'll switch off gas to Russia. Has been ridiculed, by the way, and rightly so. It's a completely unreal offer which the Germans made. But that at least shows that the Germans are committed to seeing it done. And there is now more talk of more sanctions about it from the US. I think the US needs to accept that this thing is going to happen. I think that these attempts to try and stop it almost certainly won't stop it. And at the same time, what they're doing is they're riling German opinion. They're making a lot of people in Germany angry with the US in ways that they would not otherwise be. So this campaign, if it's persisted with by the Biden administration, is going to actually, in the end, give the Russians a victory, because they'll get Nord Stream 2 built, and they'll have created, and trouble will have been created between Germany and the US, where none really objectively should exist.
All right. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Things That Make You Go, Huh? America, in caps, American principle, no oppression. That's the super chat from Things That Make You Go, Huh? Mm-hmm. Very, very cool super chat. From Mark Hewitt, what about Africa? Are the vultures circling, waiting for the possible, this is a good question, waiting for the possible Egypt-Ethiopia conflict?
That's a huge question, actually, and a very, very good one. Can I just say, this all relates to various dams that the Egyptians are building, and which the Ethiopians are unhappy about because, of course, no, sorry, it's the Ethiopians who are building the dams.
Yeah,
it's the other way around. It's the Ethiopians are building the dams, and the Egyptians are unhappy about it. And of course, Egypt has very powerful armed forces, but Ethiopia also has its own abilities to defend itself. And Egypt sees this as an existential issue. And, we could conceivably and potentially see a big clash around this. So we'll just have to see. And the situation in both of these countries is perhaps not fully stable. Egypt, or the Sisi government that gained power through a coup, which overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't know how fully stable it is. And it seems that Biden isn't very favorable to Sisi, even though he seems to be green-lighting a major arms sale to Egypt. It's all very complicated. And at the same time, in Ethiopia itself, there's an ongoing civil conflict between the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan movement, northern Ethiopia, which apparently is tying down large parts of the Ethiopian military. So this has a potential to spin out of control, and we'll just see what happens and how it works out. And it's not getting enough attention because the Egyptians are very concerned. The Ethiopians are determined to press on with their dams, and the world powers are not really active in addressing this issue and in talking to both sides and into trying to calm things down, because they're not really focused on this problem. I mean, they've got problems all sorts of other places. And as we've discussed in the first part of this program, well, the focus for the Biden administration is the Middle East. And they're not really very interested in what happens in Africa, in East Africa, even though arguably that's a more dangerous situation. It's still more dangerous situation than almost any other.
Yeah. Thank you for that super chat. Great question. From Valley S, a $20 super chat. Have a drink on me, says Valley S. Thank you very much.
We definitely will.
We definitely will. All right. From Sparky, $2 super chat. He says, Lincoln said it. He was quoting the Bible when you mentioned the house divided, Alexander.
Oh, absolutely.
So that is Sparky's.
That's entirely right. One of his great speeches. And you're absolutely right. He was quoting the Bible.
That's right. From Cora Marie, $10 super chat. Do you believe Trump knew the goal of the Democrats and informed the countries in the Middle East that now have peace deals?
Very good question. Now, of course, Trump was regularly talking to Middle East leaders, something, by the way, which Biden doesn't do to anything like the same extent. But Trump had, regular contacts with Middle East leaders. So it's possible. I don't know what Trump actually knew about what Biden was up to. And of course, bear in mind that Trump expected to win the election and to have that second term. And I think he went on thinking that he might get his second term, after the election. Again, I have to be very careful with what I say. And maybe that was his focus. But it's quite possible he did tip off Middle Eastern leaders. The problem is, with people like MBS, one just doesn't know how much attention they'd have paid to any warnings they got from Trump. I think Erdogan would have done, but MBS and people like him, I simply don't know.
All right. From Sparky, $5 super chat. Good, bad, or indifferent. The CV is what used to be called pneumonia. Pneumonia has victimized elderly and immunocompromised throughout history.
Well, I mean, we've had many diseases and many infections throughout history, including respiratory problems. This, as you correctly say, is simply one.
Mm-hmm. From Sparky, a $5 super chat. With the impending fall of the EU, the globalist headquarters became even more centered in Washington, D.C.
I think this is absolutely right, because it's a very good point, actually, because, I mean, we look at the EU at the moment and the quality of leadership. I mean, poor as the quality of leadership is in Washington, and we discussed this before, I mean, even Washington looks competent and functional compared to what's going on in Brussels and in the rest of the EU at the moment. I mean, I've just done a program in my channel about a very strange interview that Macron gave with the Financial Times, which seemed to me so completely detached from reality. Apparently, Merkel is basically withdrawn into, well, I was going to say a bunker in Berlin, but perhaps I shouldn't say that. Well, I have said it. But anyway, I mean, she's retreated apparently to all intents and purposes from any kind of real discussions or dialogues with people. And she's basically no longer leading to the extent that she ever did, more hiding, as I understand it. And things in Germany are beginning to turn very sour. And given that that is so, when there is no leadership in Europe, inevitably such leadership as there is drifts back to Washington. Now, of course, there is supposed to be a transition in Germany later this year. Armin Laschet is now the leader of the Christian Democratic Party, the CDU. We will see if he does in fact become chancellor. Most people think he will. I mean, he should be, logically. And we'll see what he amounts to, whether he's prepared to break with Merkel or not. I doubt it. He doesn't come across to me as a very strong personality, and he has a very limited background, very much confined to, the sort of Western German regions. But, let's give the man a chance and see and hope for the best. But at the moment, you're absolutely right. Washington calls the shots because nobody in Europe can.
All right. From Irish Partisan, no lockdown here in Belarus.
Well,
that is very true. Irish Partisan, I saw your video in Belarus where you were hanging out, night out on the town. That was a great video. Check out Irish Partisan's channel. It's really, really good. From...
By the way, can I just add, no lockdown apparently in Moscow either anymore.
Yes, in Moscow as well. That is true. Yeah. From Sparky, a $5 super chat. Iran is self-sufficient as far as natural resources and other factors, as is Brazil, the U.S., Russia, and China. Not all countries are like that.
Absolutely true. That is a major factor. By the way, one of the things that those who support sanctions often don't understand about particular countries. A country like Russia, which is, both, food self-sufficient as it is now. It wasn't always, but it is now. I mean, they sorted out their agriculture very fast and is self-sufficient in nearly all other natural resources. Is essentially a country that is going to be very, very resistant to sanctions. Iran is not self-sufficient in the same way entirely, but it has a lot of natural resources it can work with and which can insulate it from that kind of pressure. And of course, Brazil, again, also true. So sanctions don't really work against these countries in the way that they might do against other countries, which don't have that tremendous sense of, self-sufficiency that these countries do.
All right.
That's a very good point, actually.
Very good point. From Maria Antonia Young, $100 super chat. Awesome.
Wow.
Thank you, Maria Antonia Young. The question is Trump controlled opposition? Swamp still active? This is a good point. Swamp still active. No arrests. AG bar toothless. Big tech freely censoring. Untested vaccine promoted. Citizens locked down. Deeply divided country. One could argue oligarchs' interests well served during Trump's 4 years.
You absolutely can, and that's a very good point. And I mean, we've talked a lot about Trump on this program. We mustn't build him up into more than, ignore the problems. I mean, he never worked out or built up a functional team, and that is something which we have to say about him. He made constant choices of people who, in the end, didn't work out for him, and Barr, whom I had high hopes of, turned out in the end for him a huge disappointment. And of course, we've seen that the Duran investigation, well, that apparently continues until it eventually produces some kind of report which nobody's going to read because he's not going to say anything. So much about Trump, which didn't in the end work. I still don't think he is controlled opposition, because if he was, why would they attack him in this vehement way? I mean, the anger and loathing they feel towards Trump. And I talk about them, I read, I listen to them. It's not invented. They're not posing as hating Donald Trump. They really hate Donald Trump. And the reason they hate Donald Trump is because they fear him. And that suggests to me that he is not controlled opposition.
Yeah, what Trump was an outsider who got into the White House. Yes. And we've said it many times in many videos, Alexander, the pivotal moment of everything hinged on getting Michael Flynn out. Yes. Michael Flynn was Trump's guide to Washington, D.C., guide to the swamp.
Yes, that's exactly
the minute they got rid of Flynn, everything just was off kilter. It was off balance.
Correct. I completely agree with that. I mean, Flynn knew his way around Washington. Donald Trump didn't. He'd never held elected office before. He'd never held public office before. He came from New York. He didn't understand fully how Washington worked. He had a great sense of the problems there, but he never really understood who to appoint, who to put in the various places in the bureaucracy, how to play the various parts of the bureaucracy off against each other in order to advance his agenda. Without Flynn there to guide him, he lost his way.
Always remember, Obama was very worried about Flynn. So Obama knew what he was doing as well. He was very worried about Flynn, and he warned Trump about Flynn, because Obama knew that Flynn would have been the guy to show Trump the inner workings of what was going on.
Exactly.
So Flynn was always considered a danger to the swamp.
Absolutely.
All right, from Sparky, as timid as Bill Gates is, he's a tough guy compared to the younger high-tech leaders. His parents made him play sports, etc., instead of nerding out. Without globalist support, they would quickly fold.
I agree, actually. I mean, I should say I don't know any of these people, but what I've seen of them, I'm going to say straightforwardly, has not impressed me. And I mean, I think they've been making decisions recently which are more and more eccentric and more bizarre. And I think Bill Gates, I think you're absolutely right. Whatever you may think of Bill Gates, and I'm not going to say what I think about Bill Gates, because if I said it, I mean, we'd have all kinds of problems. But whatever you think about him, I think he does have some understanding of the world and of the limitations that exist around him. I think many of these guys don't. And they're making one mistake after another, and they're going to trip up, and they're going to trip up soon. It's not going to take very long down. I mean, we did a program about Facebook and Australia, and I think what Facebook did in Australia was a huge mistake.
Yeah. From Sparky, a $2 super chat. Thank you very much, Sparky, for that. From Matt Dugas, $139. Thank you very much for that. And here is the question. The question comment is, are men of sun and women of the world and moon?
Oh, this is perhaps more how should I say?
Is that a quote from a book or a poem? Or
I was going to say. I wonder. I don't know. I should say that I place great value of both men and women, and I'm very much someone who loves my wife, who's a remarkable person who does amazing things. And I never think of. I just don't think in those terms. But well, perhaps if it's a quote, you can tell us where it comes from.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt, for that. That was
and for everything.
Yes, thank you very much. From Sparky, often things need to get worse before they get better. It
So
may
true.
be why, quote, it's always darkest before the dawn.
That's absolutely right. I mean, sometimes, there's a wonderful quote from, there's the French General Marshal Foch, who said, something like, my centre's been smashed, my left wing has been turned, situation excellent, I shall attack. I think sometimes politically we are almost in that kind of situation at this moment in time. I mean, the other side, again, picking my words carefully, are now making mistakes. They're making more and more mistakes because they're both at one and the same time very nervous, and at the same time they think they've won. And you can start to see that these mistakes are going to start accumulating. And our side, I'm sorry to use these terms, has learnt many things and is still there and is going to come back. Again, I'm sorry if I'm talking in riddles. I hope not impossible riddles, but I hope you all understand what I'm saying.
All right. From Sparky, $2 super chat. Even the East India Company yielded to the British Empire.
Well, indeed. True. Exactly. Well, indeed. We have this concept in Britain of the overmighty subject who always sort of comes down and faces a fall. In fact, if what people know their history, this is what always happens in the end. People always sort of set themselves up and then they discover that it doesn't really work and that the political system somehow in the end corrects itself and these overmighty figures come down in the end. So I'm sure that's what's going to happen. I'm sure that is.
Sparky, another $2 super chat. Thank you very much, Sparky, for that. From Brando Commando, $50 super chat. Awesome.
Wow.
Thank you, Brando Commando, for that. The question is, on the language question, the reason why English is the lingua franca is because it's such a diverse language. Try translating antivirus software or microbial antigens in French or Chinese. It doesn't work. One of the great legacies of the British Empire, in my opinion.
I think I would agree, and I would again say that my wife is a person who's obviously very intimate with English because she's director of English at British University, and of course takes great interest in the language. And of course, the English language is a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not going to compare it with other languages. I note what you say and I hear what you say. I don't have that knowledge of programming and that kind of thing, but certainly English is a tremendous language. It's relatively easy to learn. People can communicate with it, and it has this tremendous power and facility of being able to say the most complicated things in a clear way. I heard, by the way, just to say something, apparently Germans, many Germans like to read Clausewitz. This is the famous person who wrote On War. They like to read him in English translation because he's clearer. I've actually, a German once told me that.
Okay, thank you very much for that super chat. From James Farr, $20 super chat. Good job, guys. And please look into learning about and telling everyone to grow their own food or start a co-op. Crop losses are bad, and now the war against the food is making it much worse. Hashtag military, hashtag Jiminy Crypto.
Well, my wife and you must get together because she's absolutely would support you on this, and she's working very hard to make me understand the importance of all those things also.
All right. From Sparky, super chat says, "Be good, sheeple, and embrace, quote, the new normal." I hate that phrase, the new normal, Sparky. Oh my God.
I agree.
I'm with Sparky on that super chat.
Totally, completely.
Embrace the new normal. It's the marketing firms that come up with that. Somewhere in LA or New York. And they're coming up with all these phrases, build back better and the new normal. And
exactly.
Boris used to build back better. So
well, he did. He absolutely did. Didn't do you much good, by the way. People didn't like it.
All right. From Life and Brian, $4.99. 60% of those polled agree with the claim that media outright lies to push messages. Of the other 40%, how many are moderately persuadable? Interesting question.
Good, very interesting question. I mean, I don't know the answer, but I think you make a very interesting question, and one which, again, obviously invites research, actually. But I would have thought a lot is the answer.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are persuadable.
Persuadable, yeah.
Especially when they're being groomed.
Yeah,
and they're being persuaded slowly.
Yes.
So, Moon Swan Silverlight, a £10 super chat. Thanks for having me on, lads. I was originally not going to do it, as I'm very shy, but decided to bite the bullet. Hopefully, it will be easier next time. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Moon Swan Silverlight. It was our pleasure to speak with you, and your question was fantastic.
Fantastic.
Our pleasure to speak with you. From Anatoly 449. Democracy was invented in Athens. All citizens knew each other and how everything functioned in the city, the conditions needed for democracy to work.
Yes, well, of course, democracy in Athens was profoundly different from democracy in the United States. I mean, Athens, I mean, it's actually not quite correct that everybody knew each other. You're talking about a citizen's body of about 30,000 people, which obviously you can't have everybody knowing everybody else there. But you were able to meet in one place, the PNIX. If you go to Athens, we've got a person who arranges trips to Greece, who does sort of bespoke things to Greece. You're interested in that kind of thing, you can arrange to show you the PNIX in Athens.
Link is down below. Greek travel gurus, guys. Link is down below.
Absolutely.
Contact him. He's your man.
It's an extraordinary thing, actually, because given how important the PNIX was to Greek history and to our civilization and to democracy, it's remarkable how whenever I go there, I'm always by myself, but you can actually go to the very place where people met and talked and voted, and see the exact location where Greek leaders like Pericles and all the others used to stand up and speak and things of that kind. And it worked, and it was a system that worked for them. I mean, there were certain certain people couldn't vote. I mean, women couldn't vote. There were large numbers of slaves. They were very, very, very strict immigration controls, by the way, which was seen as essential for democracy. That's what the Athenians thought, because they felt that the citizen body had to be kept coherent for democracy to work. That was their idea. There were also strict rules about misleading the public, by the way, about people who stand up and lied, and to the people they could face, well, shall we say, criticisms and all kinds of things. So a lot of the seeds you see in democracy originate in Athens. But of course, what the ancients didn't have was representative democracy of the kind that we have, and the kind of systems of a system of democracy that expands across the United States. And yet I do think the connection is there. I do think there is a lot of things about Athenian democracy and American democracy, for example, which relate to each other. And there is so many things in the Constitution which the ancient Athenians would have supported and approved of. The First Amendment of the Constitution being one.
All right. S. Zariel is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome to the Duran community. Zariel from Brando Commando. Are there any countries that you guys think will break up in the next 50 years, either peacefully or violently? I think Canada, UK, South Africa, and Balkans will.
Well, I think Britain, I'm afraid there's a real possibility. I mean, I don't want that to happen. As I've said many times, I'm somebody who feels great loyalty to the United Kingdom. But I mean, I think it's possible that Scotland could go. I'm not sure it will. I hope it doesn't. But if it does, that's their decision, and I wish them the best if they do that. But Britain may. Let's talk about Spain. I mean, there's more problems in Catalonia underway at the moment. And I'm sure there's other places around the world. I mean, we've already seen, South Sudan breaking away from Sudan. We see problems in Ethiopia where there's a war on. We've seen problems in Indonesia, which is a complex country made up of many different islands, and some of which have had distinct personalities and identities. I hope we don't see too much of that in the future, but it's possible that we can. And of course, Russia is the country that came out of the Soviet Union, but it's still a country with many nations. The Russians are now very much the dominant nation within it, and the new Russian constitution has confirmed that they are the nation around which the state is built. It's actually in the constitution now, but Putin actually made certain comments in a meeting with party leaders just a few days ago, in which he had to say, we must remember that there are people who are Russian citizens, but they may belong to other ethnicities. And the very fact that he had to say that, or felt that he had to say that, shows that there's always these concerns about Russia too. So, I'm afraid there's plenty of potential for all sorts of places to break up, and we shall see whether it happens. I personally hope it doesn't, certainly not to my country, to Britain, but we will see.
All right, from Matro25, 1399 Super Chat. Why do you guys support Sisi, a military dictatorship hired by American military industrial complex, but abhor Erdogan, a democratically elected leader?
Well, first of all, we don't support Sisi, and if you go back at the time of the coup, you will find that I had no hesitation at all at the time in saying that it was a coup, and I was profoundly shocked by the violence with which Sisi used to suppress people in Egypt. I think the situation in Egypt is extremely unstable, and I think the very last thing that Egypt should have is another massive arms deal, which is apparently being done by the Biden administration at this moment in time in the United States. The only thing I will say about Egypt is that, of course, if Sisi falls, which he may very well do, I am extremely worried and concerned about what may come after him, because I don't think the situation in Egypt is at all stable. But please don't interpret that as an endorsement of Sisi himself. So just to get that out of the way and to get that settled. Now, as for Erdogan, yes, I have never disputed the fact that he is an elected leader of Turkey. I also fully acknowledge, and I think we both acknowledge, that he is in some ways an extremely capable politician, that he has a great deal of support with the Turkish people and with many people in Turkey, lots of opposition to him also. At the same time, I do think that many of his political decisions and choices have not been good for Turkey. I think his foreign policy is wildly overambitious and inherently destabilizing. I think some of his economic choices have been eccentric, and I think he has been drifting increasingly towards taking extremely confrontational solutions to political challenges within Turkey itself, which I think are ultimately going to be destabilizing. So I criticize much that Erdogan does, even though I acknowledge the democratic origins of his government and of himself. I think he's drifting away from those. I think there are problems building up. Simply because somebody was democratically elected doesn't mean that I can't criticize them.
Yeah, I agree. Erdogan is a much different Erdogan when he first came into office than he is now. There has definitely been an evolution there, and I would say it's an evolution that has not been for the better. He was a much different politician.
I agree. He's become. I'm afraid he's become. I can just say, I think he's become very vain, and I think he's increasingly losing his touch. And as often happens when leaders do that, I think he's using more and more methods which ultimately are undermining a lot of the things that he did when he became leader at the beginning.
All right. From Talos828, greetings from Hungary. What do you guys think of the Libya peace process with peace and the end of the migrant crisis? So will peace be the end of the migrant crisis?
Well, I hope so, and I hope it works, but I'm far from confident that it will, because certainly it's a peace, it's a negotiation born of exhaustion. And to some extent, by the way, can I also say this is a peace which I suspect has been quietly worked on by the Russians and the Turks in the background. I mean, Putin and Erdogan, who are the two prime backers of the two sides, have been having lots of discussions about Libya behind the scenes. It's not something that people hear very much about, but that has definitely been going on. But I have to say, the situation in Libya has been so bad, it has been destabilized to such an extent. There are so many violent people in Libya that going to re-establishing peace in Libya through this process is going to be a labor of Hercules. I hope it's successful. I hope for the Libyan people it's successful. I hope also for the people of Europe it's successful, because as you absolutely rightly say, Libya has now become a major funnel for refugees to come to Europe. But I'm absolutely not guaranteeing that it will.
All right. Thank you for that super chat from Gavin B. How much of a difference will the new channel GB News make, given that there are those already trying to put off advertisers from funding the channel? Can the media landscape be changed?
Well, I think it can be changed in Britain. But again, as you rightly say, it's going to face enormous challenges at so many different levels. And we see how increasingly we have entities like Ofcom, which have been becoming increasingly involved in decisions, which basically seem to be intended to keep the media landscape in Britain much as it is. Eventually, this will break down, but whether that will happen now or later, we will see.
All right. From Anatoly, thank you for your work, Alex. And Alex, brilliant commentary as always. Wanted to ask, will you be doing a video on big tech founding government's bill? Yes, we need to do a video on that.
Absolutely.
And the government bill.
Yes,
we will. Short answer is yes, we will. Yes, Thank you for that. Super chat from Sparky. Some college professors comfort in their bitter melancholy makes them vulnerable to be useful idiots. Unhealthy emotions are often exploited.
Absolutely true. Very, very much so. And that, I am afraid, is a reality about both politics and academic life. As I said, my wife is a university teacher. So when we talk about academics and academic life, I know exactly what I mean.
All right. From A. Sanchez, 999, keep up the good work. Thank you very much, A. Sanchez, for that. From Anatoly, any news on Ghislaine Maxwell?
Huge amounts of news, lots going on in her case. It's all very, very interesting. I mean, she's increasingly trying to represent herself as the victim of all of this, but at the same time, it's been fascinating to see how her defense has been steadily unraveling, as far as I can see. We have had confirmation, apparently, that she was taking films. She seems to have been involved in all kinds of activities that she wasn't, previously admitting to. Again, I'm sorry, I have to be careful with what I say. And of course, she seems to have been very deeply involved with Epstein, indeed, in much of the kind of ways that we suspected. We actually, Alex, I'm going to say this, we need to do a program.
Yeah, we need to do a video on that too.
I mean, we really do.
Anatoly has given us 2 videos.
He has. I mean, there's a huge amount to unpack here, and we haven't looked at this case for a long time.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on that we need to cover. We'll get a video on that too out this week. Definitely. Thank you, Anatoly, for that. From Sparky, like women being jealous of tomboys for their ability to connect with men, the establishment is jealous of President Trump's ability to connect to voters. Interesting analogy.
Profoundly true. That is absolutely right. I mean, the way they see Donald Trump, and they see the way he connects with voters, and they are both intensely jealous of it, and they're frightened of it.
All right. From Beautiful Mermaid from Outschwarenberg, CHA for one. Thank you very much for that. Super chat there from Sparky. For an example of the admiration for U.S. by many around the world in the 1960s, look at many former colony flags seemingly inspired by the U.S. flag.
Oh, absolutely right. Absolutely. And of course, so many people trying to copy the US Constitution and never succeeded, by the way, never really succeeded. And look at how many countries around the world refer to their leader as the president.
Yes, that is true. From Mary Antonia Young, $5 super chat. I believe there's no question there. Is there? Oh, yes, there is. Who pulls Bill Gates' strings? Who wields ultimate world power? That is, I want the answer to that question as well.
So do I. So do I. So do I. Maybe Klaus can tell us. Where
maybe Klaus Schwab. I think that
Davos.
I think Maria Antonia Young is onto something, though. While Bill Gates is absolutely powerful and influential, I don't think he's he's at the top of the ladder, so to speak.
I completely agree. I agree.
Yeah. With that. I think he is an effective front man. That's for sure. And a very wealthy front man.
Yeah.
All right. That is everything. Wait, we got one more from Sparky. Got to wonder if Trump really wanted re-election, he kept Pompeo, Haspel, Pence, Christopher Wray, and others. Cicero's proverbial enemy from within.
So true.
Sparky has been just crushing it today. Crushing it today with
he certainly has. He certainly has
the wisdom.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Just to answer that question, I think he did want to win, but I think he made many mistakes along the way. And Sparky has put his finger on perhaps the single most important one.
And on that note, we will end this live stream.
Absolutely.
3 hours plus. Guys, thank you very much for testing out the live call. We'll definitely incorporate that into our shows. Thank you to everyone for their awesome super chats, for everyone in the chat. Of course, we all got to give a super big thank you to Spartan Warrior Queen for all your help and the great work you did today, moderating the chat. That is it, Alexander. Let's wrap it up. Let's end it there. Any final thoughts before we take off for the weekend?
Just to say, this has been one of the most stimulating live streams we've ever done, and that says a great deal because they've all been wonderful. But this one has been exceptional, and we will certainly do this again. Absolutely.
And Lil Panda Cub sent us 33 NOK super sticker. Thank you very much for that. It was great talking to you, Lil Panda Cub. All right, Alexander, we'll end it there. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.